"I've always thought it one of the greatest stories of the war," the young American said, his eyes shining. "The way those boys went in, knowing what was coming to them." The innkeeper's eyes grew reminiscent. "They were great guys," he said softly. "And every operation connected with the Black Fjord was carried out from here?" "Yes. Sutton Craddock was their base. They arrived in January 43 and began training for the job shortly afterwards." "Did you meet the rest of the squadron? Milner, Ailiff, Barrett?" "Yes. And Bergman and Grenville. I knew them all." The American shook his head in envy. "Grenville's been my hero since I was a kid at school. I never thought that one day I'd be standing in the pub where he and his boys used to drink their beer." His eyes wandered round the lounge. Like the rest of the Black Swan, it was of great age, with panelled walls and a timbered ceiling blackened by the smoke of centuries. Polished brass ornaments were everywhere. The counter at which the American and his friend were leaning was a massive structure, scarred and weathered, and at one end of it a large bowl of daffodils glowed with startling brightness against the pitch-black wood. But the outstanding feature of the room was its photographs. These were hanging in double tiers round its panelled walls. There were pictures of aircraft, of a Boston, of a crashed Messerschmitt 110, of a graceful twin-engine plane with RAF markings and cannon protruding from its sleek nose. There were photographs of airmen, some in flying kit, others in uniform, nearly all young, and nearly all smiling. Among them, seeming incongruous in their company, was the portrait of a tall, fair-headed naval lieutenant. In its way, the room was a hall of fame, the innkeeper's tribute to courage, to the men he had known and loved. The American drew in a deep breath and turned back eagerly. "Oh, tell us something about them, Pop. Tell us all you know about the Black Fjord job. Me and Danny here are pretty soft on the 633 Squadron. We heard about your place a few weeks back and made up our minds to do a trip up here the first chance we got." The innkeeper, heavy of build and short-sighted, looked at each eager face in turn. Both men were young, no more than 22 or 3. The American, who had introduced himself as Malcolm Daly, was slimly built, with dark hair and humorous yet thoughtful eyes. He was wearing the uniform of the United States Army Air Force. His friend in the Royal Air Force, Danny Johnson, was more stocky of build, with sandy hair and a square, pleasant face. Both were still young enough to feel hero worship, and the atmosphere of the room had brought its glow into their eyes. The innkeeper nodded. "All right," he said. "Take your beers over to a table." The two pilots went over to a table by the fire. 2 minutes later, the innkeeper returned. He had a thick folder and a photograph album under his arm. He put them down on the table in front of the two men. "There you are," he said. "I've written a biography of 633 Squadron's operation in the Black Fjord, the Svartsfjord, as it's called in Norway." He opened the album and pointed to a photograph of 2 shell-torn aircraft. "That's how 2 of the planes looked after getting back from Bergen. They flew 400 miles like that." At that moment, a car engine sounded on the drive outside. After a few moments, the engine died, and a man entered the lounge. The newcomer, wearing a Trilby hat and an old belted mackintosh, hesitated in the doorway. The atmosphere of the room seemed to daze him with its impact, and the sight of the 3 men at the table to add further irresolution to his movements. He was turning back to the door when he shook his head almost angrily and approached the barmaid at the counter. After a further glance at the engrossed innkeeper, he ordered a beer in a low, unfriendly voice. The barmaid watched him take his glass into the corner by the door. The newcomer sat among the shadows, his head lowered, his eyes alternating between the photographs and the bespectacled innkeeper at the table. The innkeeper pushed the album across the table. "This is the complete story of the operation," he said. "It starts with 633 taking up their new base on the airfield opposite and ends among the Focke-Wulfs and Flak in the Black Fjord." He paused for a moment, and then he began again at the beginning. 633 Squadron took over its new airfield at Sutton Craddock on the 8th of January, 1943. It was a bleak day, with a spot of drizzle and a raw wind from the east. The deep, low humming of the aircraft grew louder until the windows of the Black Swan were rattling with the noise. A crow, perched high on the crab-apple tree in the front garden, took fright and fled down the road like a startled enemy bandit. The first Boston appeared out of the cloud. It was piloted by Grenville, and he brought it low, studying the layout of the airfield. He caught sight of the lone inn on the road alongside the field and wondered what it was. A Cockney voice suddenly came over the intercom. "Hey, looks as if the natives are friendly, Skipper. See that girl down there, waving to us? Now, ain't that nice?" Well, that was Hopkinson, his observer. Hoppy had the eyesight of a sparrowhawk. Grenville's eyes, the only part of his face visible above his mask, crinkled in a brief smile as he wagged his wings in reply. Then control came through again, and once more his gaze became intent on the airfield. He completed a circuit, then came down to land. With flaps down and engines throttled back, the Boston swooped over the field and landed as gracefully as a ballerina. The rest of the squadron followed her down, scattering groups of sparrows like dry leaves in a wind. On hearing the approaching engines, Maisie, the barmaid of the Black Swan, had run to the door of the bar. She was a big, handsome girl with black hair, dark eyes, and bold features. She stood on the steps, waving a duster at each plane as it roared by. She was joined, a few seconds later, by the innkeeper, Joe Kearns. Kearns was a man in his middle 50s, bespectacled, stout of build, with thinning white hair and a pleasant, ruddy face. He stood peering up into the drizzle until the last plane had gone by. Maisie's eyes were sparkling with excitement as she drew reluctantly back into the bar. "Oh, they looked fine, didn't they, coming in low like that? Did you see them waggling their wings? They saw me waving to them." There was satisfaction in her strong, throaty voice. A smile pulled at the corner of Joe Kearns's mouth. "Aye, they saw you all right." "I wonder who they are," said Maisie. "One of the station police who came in here last week said they were a crack squadron coming in for special duties. Do you think they might have some of those aces among them, like those you read about in the papers? Or wouldn't that be wonderful?" She looked eagerly at Kearns. "Do you think any of them will come over tonight?" Kearns shook his head. "I don't know, lass. They'll have their own mess, but we're bound to get some over, eventually." One of them did come over that very evening, just before dinner, but he was not one of Maisie's aces. He was Adams, the station intelligence officer. Before leaving his billet, he checked his appearance in a mirror. His reflection showed him a man in his middle 40s with short legs, a plump, round face, and spectacles. His service greatcoat added to his stoutness, and the peaked cap made his face look owlish. Nothing could look less military, and Adams turned away from the vision in distaste. Adams was something of a complex character. He hated war, yet would have given his right arm to have been young and fit enough for flying duties. Temperamentally, he was unsuited for intelligence work because of the romantic streak in his nature, which constantly rebelled at having to keep silent over the deeds of courage he heard almost daily. He was a keen observer, highly imaginative, self-critical to a fault, and utterly contemptuous of his role in the war, being quite certain that the crews he interrogated shared his contempt. His wife was a woman 15 years younger than himself, and it was because of her that he was making his present call at the Black Swan. He stood now in front of the blackout curtain of the lounge, staring round at the panelled walls with their glinting brass ornaments. Maisie, reading a thriller behind the counter, looked up and quickly preened herself. He wasn't exactly the film star type, but still, he was a squadron leader, and she decided he deserved one of her Sunday afternoon smiles. "Good evening, sir. What can I get you?" Adams approached the counter. Good evening. Is the landlord about? I'd like a word with him, please." "Oh, Mr. Kearns. Half a mo. I'll give him a shout. Joe, there's a gentleman from the aerodrome to see you." Kearns entered the bar, eyeing Adams curiously. Good evening, sir. What can I do for you?" I'm looking for a place for my wife," Adams told him. "I've just arrived today, and one of the workmen said you had rooms here. What's the position?" Kearns shook his white head regretfully. "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. I don't let rooms anymore. I'm a widower. I can't get the help to do the cooking, that sort of thing. Help's hard to come by these days, you know." "Oh, Mrs. Billen would help you out," Maisie interrupted. "She said she'd lend her hand if you were ever stuck." The grateful look on Adam's face encouraged Maisie to continue. "He'll never get a room in Highgate. It's full of evacuees. Oh, go on, Joe. Let him have one here. We'll manage." Kearns shifted uncomfortably. He was a kind-hearted man who always found difficulty in refusing a request. He scratched his head uncertainly. "Well, if you think your wife wouldn't mind doing her own cooking—" "Oh, I'm sure she wouldn't," Adams said. He was not sure at all. Kearns was still undecided. "Well, I hadn't intended to take anyone in, but—" "Oh, well, all right then. Seeing how things are, I'll do it. You'd better come through and see what I've got. Hey, that's better, Maisie said cheerfully, opening the flap of the counter to let Adams through. It's up to all of us to do what we can for the services. Somewhat hastily, Adams followed the landlord. He came back 10 minutes later, looking pleased. He went round the counter, then approached Maisie, who leaned forward. All fixed up? She asked. Well, thanks to you, yes. What will you have to drink? Oh, you don't have to buy me a drink for that. I know, said Adams awkwardly. I just want to buy you a drink. What will you have? Maisie surrendered gracefully. Oh, all right. If it'll make you feel better, I'll have a drop of gin. We managed to get a few bottles last week. Like a tot? No, I'll have a pint of bitter, please. Maisie poured the drinks, then leaned voluptuously against the counter. Were you in one of those planes that passed over this afternoon? Adams nodded. Yes, I was in the Bombay, the big one that came in last. Did you see me waving? Yes. Well, we all saw you. I waved back, as a matter of fact. Maisie treated him to a big smile, the one she reserved for very special customers. That same evening, a small Norwegian fishing boat drew alongside a jetty in a northern Scottish port. Except for a car standing with dimmed lights and 2 waiting men, the jetty was deserted. The boat's diesel engine went silent as she drifted slowly in, the wind sighing through her riggings. The 2 waiting men seized her mooring ropes, and a few seconds later the boat was firmly anchored to the quayside. The 2 men on the jetty hurried back to their car, one settling behind the wheel, the other taking his seat in the back. The engine started up impatiently. A few seconds passed. Then a man wearing a dark blue fisherman's jersey leapt up from the boat and ran towards them. He was no sooner in the car than it pulled away, throwing him back into his seat. He felt his hand gripped tightly. Hello, my boy. How did it go this time? Oh, very well, sir. The newcomer had a faint Norwegian accent. No trouble? No, sir. Nothing. The darkness was giving way to the grey of the dawn, and both men could see the other's features. The Norwegian was a man in his late 20s, tall and broad, with an open, pleasant face and a shock of yellow hair. His questioner was an elderly man of soldierly appearance, with iron-grey hair and a trim moustache. The epaulets on his khaki greatcoat showed him to be a brigadier. He had a clipped, controlled voice. Any more luck? He asked quietly. Well, yes, a little more anyway. The brigadier's hand gripped the younger man's arm. Well done. We've had a bad week wondering how things were going. He paused, then went on. How are you feeling after the trip? Would you like a rest before the interrogation? We're all pretty keen to get started, of course, but I can arrange a rest if you need one. Oh, no. I'm all right, sir. Where are we going now? Well, we got a place in the country. It's only 15 minutes from here. Anyway, you can have a long rest tomorrow. In fact, you should have a fairly easy time for the next 2 or 3 weeks. This is what we've laid on for you. The brigadier spoke for over 10 minutes. You'll leave by train in 2 days' time, he finished. When you get to Highgate, the Air Force will take you over. We put an Air Commodore in the know, a chap called Davis, and he'll take you to the squadron's new base at Sutton Craddock. Once there, your job is to prevent curiosity. Now, that could be a nuisance, so we've arranged for you to go as a naval lieutenant. The story will be circulated that you've been sent by the Admiralty as a liaison officer to study Air Force procedure, and also to tip off the squadron about enemy naval movements, so on. Well, most bomber squadrons get one sooner or later, and we think it'll cover you up nicely. Of course, you'll get more detailed instructions before you go, but is everything clear so far? Oh, quite clear. What squadron is it, sir? The brigadier's voice expressed his satisfaction. Well, we've done well for you there, although Bomber Command didn't let 'em go without a fight. We've got 633 Squadron, Roy Grenville's boys. As you probably know, they're one of Bomber Command's crack squadrons. They need to be, from what we hear. The Norwegian was looking puzzled. But Grenville's squadron uses Bostons, doesn't it? Surely they can't carry heavy enough bombs for this job. And you say Sutton Craddock is down in North Yorkshire? Or shouldn't they use a base in Scotland to cut down the range? Again the brigadier lowered his voice. Well, Jerry might start getting suspicious if a new light bomber squadron moved up into Scotland. He'll be wondering about 633, of course, but for the very reason you mention, he won't guess its purpose. The doubt was still in the Norwegian's eyes. But I still don't understand, sir. How can they do this job in Bostons? They won't have to, the brigadier told him. There's something very special coming along. Don't worry. They'll have the planes to get there. Back at Sutton Craddock that morning, all the orderly disorder of a squadron on the move was at its height. An endless convoy of lorries was bringing in the stores. Thousands of gallons of high-octane fuel were being poured into the petrol dump. Hundreds of tons of equipment was being stacked into the workshops, the hangars, and the Nissen huts. The bomb store at the far end of the airfield was being filled. In the station armory were being stored the spare Browning guns, the gun sights, the belt-filling machines, all the 101 ancillaries that go with the weapons of a modern squadron. In the workshops, men toiled, heaved, and swore. Mechanics complained about their toolkits lost in transit. NCOs dashed from officers to men and from men back to officers again. As fast as stores were removed, fresh piles took their places as the lorries rolled in. At last, order began to emerge. The intelligence and navigation officers found their charts and maps and began getting their offices in order. The squadron office, the flight offices, the messes, the cookhouse, the crew rooms all started receiving their equipment at last, and the familiar yellow gas detectors began appearing in their usual places. Barrett, the station commanding officer, was standing restlessly at the window. He was a heavily built man of 42, with thinning hair, rather melancholy brown eyes, and a moustache large enough to earn him the nickname of Wally from his men. Although not imaginative, he was efficient, conscientious, and popular with his squadron. His ribbons included the AFC and the DFC, the latter medal having been won over Kiel in the early days of the war when he had collected a chest wound that had grounded him for a long time. Because of it, he was still under orders to fly as little as possible, an order that irked him, for he was a very keen pilot. As he stood at the window, the distant roar of engines as a Boston was run up for testing came to him. Queer business, this posting, he reflected. Too much secrecy for his liking. Anyway, maybe something would come out of the bag today. He certainly hoped so. The station wagon pulled up outside with a squeal of brakes. A few seconds later, he heard footsteps in the corridor, then a tap on the door. Barrett knew the first of the two men who entered. It was Air Commodore Davis, an alert little man with a sharp, intelligent face and quick, darting eyes. In certain moods, he resembled a truculent cockerel. Temper or not, he was a man Barrett held in high esteem. He came forward now with characteristic quick strides, his hand outstretched. He had a sharp, somewhat high-pitched voice. "Hello, Barrett. How's everything going? Seeing daylight yet?" "Oh, we're nearly out of the woods, sir. We're getting the kites air-tested today." "Oh, good man. That's fine. Now, I want you to meet Lieutenant Bergman. Lieutenant Bergman, this is Wing Commander Barrett, 633 Squadron CO." The Norwegian stepped forward. Barrett took a look at his firm mouth and steady blue-grey eyes and decided he looked a good type. He held out his hand. "Glad to meet you, Lieutenant." "I'm very pleased to meet you, sir." Barrett noticed the foreign accent and wondered whether it had any connection with the conference to follow. He saw Davis looking at him. "Where's Grenville and your intelligence officer?" "They're both in the SIO's room, sir. I thought there might be something you wanted to tell me before they came in." Davis shook his head. "No, I don't think there's anything. Give them a call, will you?" Barrett spoke into his desk telephone, and a few moments later there was a tap on the door. "Come in," Barrett shouted. One of the men who entered was Adams, his eyes curious behind his spectacles at the sight of the naval officer. Bergman examined him, then turned his gaze on his companion. This one, he knew, would be Grenville. Roy Grenville was 26, slightly over medium height and compact of build. The force of his personality struck Bergman at once, that indefinable magnetism that makes a man a natural leader. Yet there was nothing about his appearance to conform with the popular conception of the ace pilot. He wore his uniform correctly and well. The same self-discipline showed in his expression and movements, indicating that here was a man who, after subjecting his mind and body to 100 perils, had learned all their tricks, and now had both under rigid control. He looked an intelligent man who was applying all the power of his mind to the business of war with a ruthless disregard to its effects on himself. Below his pilot's brevet was an impressive row of ribbons, including the DSO and the DFC. Introductions were made, and Davis, who knew Grenville, exchanged a few warm words with him. Then he took his place behind Barrett's desk. His quick, keen eyes flickered on each man in turn. "The first thing I'm going to impress on you," he began, "is the need for absolute secrecy in everything you're going to hear. Not only Lieutenant Bergman's life, but the lives of hundreds of others could be lost by careless talk. In fact, God knows just what isn't at stake in this show, so keep your mouths buttoned right up. As you're going to find out in a moment, the lieutenant here isn't quite all he seems. But as far as the rest of this squadron goes, he's a Norwegian naval officer who has come here to find out what makes the RAF tick, and also to act as a liaison officer between you and naval affairs in northern waters. Most bomber squadrons get a naval officer sooner or later, and this is yours. Look after him and play up to him. That's something you can let out of the bag. In actual fact, Lieutenant Bergman is a liaison officer acting between the Norwegian resistance movement and our own special services. He used to spend most of his time over in Norway, tipping us off by wireless about shipping movements, that sort of thing. Now, however, he's handed those duties over to one of his assistants because he has made a discovery too important to be mentioned over the radio, even in code. During the last few months, he's been nipping backwards and forwards, sometimes by sea, sometimes by air, to find out what more he can do about it, and also, of course, to keep his resistance men organized. Now it seems things have gone far enough for us to be called in to help. Now, I can't tell you what the job is going to be because I don't know myself yet. But this much I can tell you. You're going to operate with these Norwegian patriots. You're going to drop supplies to them when they need them, and you're going to make any attacks Lieutenant Bergman thinks necessary. And within the next few months, you're going to be given the biggest job you've ever tackled, and you have to start training for it right away. Now, don't ask me what this job is. I haven't a clue. All I'm told is that it's immensely important, and you'll need to be trained to perfection to carry it out. Now, mind you look after your new naval officer. From what I can gather, he's worth more than a division of men at this point in the war. It was just after lunch when Adams made his way down the road to the Black Swan. The east wind was stirring the bare twigs of the hedges, and he was grateful for the warmer air that met him as he entered the lounge. Kearns came round from the bar to greet him. Good afternoon, Adams said. Has my wife arrived yet? Yes, sir, she got in about an hour ago. Do you want me to give her a call? No, don't bother. I'll go up and see her. All right, sir. Come through this way. Adams tapped on the upstairs bedroom door, then entered. A slim, fashionably dressed woman was sitting on the bed opposite him, smoking a cigarette. She was about 30, with dark, well-groomed hair and a narrow, elegant face. At her feet was an open suitcase with half its contents strewn on the floor around her. Adams closed the door and went over eagerly, bending down to kiss her. She let him touch her cheek, then turned away sharply. Adams' face dropped at once. "I'm sorry I couldn't meet you, darling," he muttered. "We had an urgent conference this morning. There wasn't a hope of getting away." Her voice was waspish. "It took me over half an hour to get a taxi. I was frozen to the bone when I got here." "Oh, I'm sorry, Valerie, darling." She gave a sudden, violent shudder. "I'm absolutely frozen, and this room's like an icebox." Adams looked around guiltily, noticing for the first time that there was no fireplace. I'll get you a paraffin heater," he said hastily. "Well, you'll have to get me something, or I'll never survive the winter." "Well, there is a private lounge downstairs you can use, you know. It has a fire." "I've seen it. The landlord has shown me around." There was a brief silence. Adams wandered dismally over to the rear window and stared out. It overlooked the garden and the field behind the inn. "Well, I took a rear room because the one at the front overlooks the airfield. I thought this one would be quieter. I remember your saying at the last place how the planes kept you awake. I thought you might like it here, though. I know things are a bit old-fashioned, but—" She broke in with a sarcastic laugh. "Old-fashioned? Have you seen the kitchen? It has a stone floor, bare walls, an old-type gas stove that explodes in your face, and a sink that's fit for nothing but pig swill. And there are absolutely no facilities whatever for doing any washing." Adams nodded heavily. "Well, I know there are snags, but what could I do? Highgate is full of evacuees. It's hopeless even to look for a room there. Things are pretty difficult everywhere these days." "Well, don't tell me there's a war on," she snapped. "If you do, I'll scream." Adams recognized all the signs of a first-class quarrel. He looked hastily at his watch. "Well, I'll have to be getting back, I'm afraid. Barrett wants to see me again this afternoon." Valerie showed a spark of interest. "Well, what's behind this move? Has Barrett told you anything yet?" Adams looked uncomfortable and didn't speak. She stared at him. "Well, what's the matter?" It's very hush-hush," Adams muttered, shifting uncomfortably. "Well, you've told me things before. Why the secrecy now?" "I'm sorry, darling, but I can't talk about it. In any case, I don't know very much." "Well, things have gone pretty far when you can't trust your own wife, haven't they?" For all his meekness, Adams had a temper. It began to show now, in spite of himself. "I'm not to blame for the Official Secrets Act, you know." Valerie's thin mouth curled. "There's no need to shout. We don't want everyone in the place to know we're quarrelling." Adams took a deep breath. "The last thing I want to do is quarrel. It's simply that I'm not allowed to breathe a word of this to anyone." He looked at his watch again. "I'll have to go. I'll be over this evening, all being well." She rose. "Well, what do you intend doing tonight? Are you going to bring a few of the boys over?" "Well, no, I hadn't planned to," he muttered. I thought as it was our first evening, we'd have it alone." She came nearer and stood beside him. Once more he found himself uncomfortably reminded that she was the taller of the two. She put a hand on his arm, her tone changing. "I'd like a little company tonight, darling. It'll do me good. Bring one or two of the boys over, please." Adams looked at her for a moment and then said, "Well, who would you like me to bring along?" "Oh, Jack Richardson and what about Roy Grenville?" "Well, those two don't get on, you know. Roy has no time for Richardson. In any case, I believe Richardson's duty officer tonight. I can ask Roy, but you know what it's like getting him to parties." Valerie pouted. "I'm certain he'll come if you tell him I've just arrived and feel like company. Well, try him anyway. Who else can you ask?" "Oh, we've had a Norwegian naval officer called Bergman attached to us. He told me over lunch he wants to find a room for his sister. Well, perhaps if he came over tonight he could meet the landlord at the same time. Seems a nice chap, and if he comes, Roy may come too. I've got the idea Roy likes him." "Oh, that's fine, darling. That'll be lovely. Oh, you're really very sweet." She lifted a hand and touched his cheek. "I know I've been grumpy, but that long wait at the station was so upsetting. Little company tonight will put me right again." Adams went downstairs again with his emotions in a tangle. He ran into Kearns in the hall. "Everything all right, sir?" "Yes, everything's fine," Adams muttered, afraid the innkeeper's shrewd eyes were reading too much on his face. "Don't you worry, sir," Kearns said unexpectedly. "We'll do our best to make her comfortable." Adams wondered afterwards why he did not deny the inference that he was worrying about anything, and realized it was because the ring of sympathy in the innkeeper's voice had come at a moment of need. His only thought at the time was that he liked the man and would like to buy him a drink. At the door, he turned back. We must have a drink and a chat together one of these nights." "Be glad to, sir," Kearns said, looking pleased. "Very glad to indeed." Adams went out in the biting wind again. His only other clear reflection came at the camp entrance when the sentry presented arms. Irrelevantly, but quite intensely, he realized he had never felt less worthy of a salute. Roy Grenville did go over to the Black Swan that night, and Bergman went with him. Bergman persuaded the landlord to let his sister have another of the spare rooms at the inn, and within a few days she arrived at Sutton Craddock. Hild Bergman could not have been taken for anything else but Scandinavian. Blonde and graceful, with eyes of fine-grained texture, blue and grey, she had regular features that were very composed for one so young. Bergman met her at the station and brought her back in a car Barrett had lent him. When they were shown up to the room, Bergman helped her to unpack her things. It was clear from both their expressions that they were delighted to be together again. They had always been deeply attached to one another, and their exile in England had strengthened that attachment. Now he was alone with her. Bergman spoke in Norwegian. "How do you like the inn?" Her enthusiasm was spontaneous. "Oh, very much. It's a charming old place." "I hope it's not going to be damp," he said. "There's nowhere else for miles around." She watched his face closely as he was speaking. There was the faintest air of preoccupation about him, something she had noticed on first meeting him at the station. In one as trained in self-discipline as he, it usually meant only one thing. "You're not going off again just as I've arrived here, are you?" she asked quietly. He stared at her and then laughed. "No, of course not. Why do you ask?" She made a little fluttering movement of her right hand, a characteristic gesture. "Oh, I don't know. But if you're not going, it doesn't matter. Why have they attached you to the Air Force? And why are you in naval uniform? Can you tell me, or is it something I should not know?" He told her as much as Davis had told the others. "That's as far as I dare go at the moment," he finished, "and even that much is very secret indeed." Her clear, steady eyes were shining. "But that is wonderful, Finn. It means you will be staying here, not going back. He checked her quickly. "It means I shall be here for a few weeks. That is why I asked you to come." "Oh, only a few weeks?" He saw her disappointment and squeezed her arm. "Well, that's longer than we've been together since 1940. Let's count ourselves lucky and make the best of it, shall we?" She made herself smile immediately. "Oh, of course we will. We will have a wonderful time. Tell me about everyone here. Have you made any friends yet?" "Yes, I think so. There's Adams. I quite like him. And then there's Roy Grenville. I haven't told you, have I, that this is the famous 633 Squadron, with Roy Grenville as squadron commander. You must have read about them in the newspapers." She nodded. "Yes, I have. You say you and he have become friends?" Bergman gave a rueful laugh. "I like to think so, although it's not easy to be certain with anyone as curt of nature as Grenville. He's a strange chap in many ways." "What do you mean?" "I don't know. He gives me the impression of being a very intelligent man who has dedicated himself to this war. In peacetime, I could imagine him as an explorer or an engineer, the type that builds a bridge where no bridge has been built before." She smiled understandingly. Bergman went on. "He has that sort of aggressiveness that every man needs to be a man. But of course, aggressiveness can be used either way, to create or to destroy. The Nazis train their youngsters to use it destructively. To defeat them, we have to use ours the same way. I feel that is what Grenville has done, deliberately made himself into as efficient a fighting machine as a man can be." "You make him sound soulless," she said. Bergman shook his head. "On the contrary, I get the impression he bitterly resents what he has had to do, and so takes it out of the Germans all the more. But I may be hopelessly wrong about him. He may really like war for war's sake. He's a most difficult man to understand." "You seem to have tried hard enough," she smiled. "I've been seeing a good deal of him these last few days. That's probably why. He has taken me up with him a few times." She gave a start. "You don't mean on raids?" "Oh, heavens, no. Just round and about. I asked him to." "Haven't you done enough flying?" she asked quietly. Bergman shrugged. "I'd never flown in Bostons before, and now I'm attached here, I felt I ought to know something about them." They chatted for another 10 minutes. Then Bergman picked up his cap regretfully. "I'm afraid I shall have to be getting back now." "Will you come over tonight?" His eyes wandered to the window again. He hesitated, then shook his head. "Things have worked out rather badly. I got some news through the other day that will keep us on duty tonight. It isn't quite definite yet. I shall get another message through later. But in any case, we shall all be standing by. But I'll be over tomorrow at the first opportunity." Promise me you will be careful," she said. He reached out and patted her cheek affectionately. "I will. Have a good night's sleep. And don't worry." A few mornings later, Barrett stood by his office window, his blunt fingers drumming impatiently on the sill. He turned sharply at a tap on the door. "Come in," he said abruptly. Grenville entered. Barrett waited until he had closed the door before speaking. "I've just had Davis on the blower. He's got a special job for us just as soon as the weather's suitable. It's a recce. My guess is that it has to do with this big job everyone's so tight-lipped about. This is the gen I've got so far." He took Grenville over to his desk, on which lay a large-scale map of Norway. He pointed a finger at a point on the coast above the 61st parallel. "There's a fjord here called the Svartfjord. It's very steep, about 25 miles long, and at the back end there's a hydroelectric plant and a large camouflaged building. It's this building we have to photograph." Grenville looked up from the map, his face curious. "You don't know what it is?" Barrett grunted his disgust. "No, but it's obviously important. They got an elaborate plan worked out to kid Jerry we don't know it's there, and are flying over that way by accident. Davis has had it all worked out and gave it to Bergman yesterday. In a few minutes we'll go in and have a talk with him. He's with Adams at the moment. I called you in to talk about the crew. Davis said he'd like you to go yourself. I said I'd like a word with you first." "Why?" Grenville asked. Barrett looked slightly uncomfortable. "Well, it seems a dicey show to me. They don't want to send an escort for fear of making Jerry suspicious, and yet if it's that important, he's bound to be on the alert. I don't fancy losing my squadron commander on some bloody mountain top, not when I've got 20-odd other pilots I can send." Well, they aren't likely to keep a constant patrol at 30,000 feet, Grenville said. Well, if you go, mind you stay up there, Barrett grunted. If you can't see anything for shadows, never mind. Come back and let them organize something else. If you go lower, they'll get you, sure as hell. He paused, frowning heavily. I asked Davis why they couldn't use a Spit for the business. He says they've tried twice, but drawn a blank each time. It seems this building is difficult to spot from the air unless you've someone with you who knows the landmarks. So we have to use old Popsy and take Bergman along as a guide. Grenville started at the Norwegian's name. Well, he's not going along, is he? Barrett nodded. That's the whole idea. He leads you over the building and tells the photographer when to press the button. Grenville's face set. Well, to hell with that. I don't want him, particularly on a job like this. What happens if a patrol jumps us and I've no rear gunner? Barrett nodded. I know how you feel, Roy, but I can't get round the orders. We haven't much of an argument anyway. 2 Spits have already failed. We might do the same without Bergman. Grenville stared angrily out of the window for several moments. Then he looked at Barrett and said, All right, if there's no other way, I'll take him. But keep him grounded in future. We're not a transport squadron. Bergman and Adams were sitting over a pile of photographs and a map of Norway when Grenville and Barrett arrived. Adams had been fully briefed on the plan, and it was he who gave the details to Grenville. He pointed to a cross on the map. You hit the coast here at a point 8 miles north of Utvik at 10:15. You must be over 30,000 feet as you come in. After crossing the coast, you make straight for Hjelmstad, this small town here. The Germans have recently opened out an ordnance factory there. We are hoping they'll assume this is the target for your reconnaissance. Allowing for your reduced airspeed, we estimate it should take you about 5¼ minutes to reach it. He looked round at the others. No one spoke. You circle Hjelmstad once, as if taking photographs, then start back southwest along this track. That leads you right over and parallel to the Svartfjord, which, as you'll notice, runs in a southwesterly direction before returning west to the sea. Your track will take you along its first 8 miles. The building is here, right at the end of the fjord. But we want as many photographs as you can get, so go on taking them until the fjord turns away. To avoid suspicion, you don't follow it, but keep straight on and hit the coast here. What are the Focke-Wulfs doing during this time? Grenville asked. Adams felt the embarrassment he always felt when discussing the ways another man should risk his life. He coughed to hide it. Well, that has all been considered in the time factor. We estimate you won't be over land more than 14 minutes. Provided you aren't detected before you reach the coast, that gives you a fair escape margin. We know Jerry has got some of the very latest FW-190A6s at Voss and Herdler, but even with them, he can't reach 30,000 feet in that time. You should make it fairly comfortably. You haven't got any performance figures on these new Focke-Wulfs yet? Grenville asked. No, but however good they are, they can hardly get up to 30,000 feet in much under 25 minutes. It's cutting it pretty fine, Barrett said anxiously. Well, it is and it isn't, Adams said. 14 minutes over the coast is a fairly generous estimate. It may well take less. All right, said Barrett with a sigh. Now let's all go over and see what Townsend's doing to old Popsy. 2 days later, a favourable weather report was received by wireless from one of Bergman's operators in Norway. That night, P. Popsy, a Boston with special powerful engines, took off on the first leg of her journey. She refueled in Scotland, where her crew had breakfast, and took off again in daylight. It was a bright winter morning with a cloudless sky, a day when war seemed an impossible nightmare. Grenville did not force the Boston up, and they were halfway across the North Sea before she reached her maximum ceiling. At 29,800 feet, she did not yaw too badly, a better height than he had dared hope for, and he might squeeze another 1,000 out of her before they reached the Norwegian coast. Her fuel load would be lighter then. To reach that height, P. Popsy had been stripped of everything not needed for the job in hand. All her armour had gone, as well as her 4 front guns. Apart from the 2 Brownings in the rear turret, she was defenceless, relying on nothing but surprise and height to bring her safely through. In the pilot's seat, Grenville was running over the plan of action. Provided they were not spotted on the way in, it seemed all right. He peered sideways, looking down the immense void to the flat, formless sea below. Weather perfect so far. There was a band of mist down there at 10 o'clock, but it didn't seem to stretch far. It had better not. Any mist in the fjord or a cloud haze above it, and they'd had it. Hoppy's voice came through on the intercom, as cheery as always. "Couple of degrees off course, skipper." Grenville checked with his compass, saw Hoppy was right, and swung the Boston gently to port. They droned on, a speck of dust in an immense blue void. At first it looked like a low-flying cloud clinging to the edge of the sea. 5 minutes later it became a snow-covered, jagged coastline, looking like the outflung leg of a sea monster from their height. Grenville checked his course, swung slightly to port, then spoke to Bergman, with whom he had not exchanged a dozen words since leaving Scotland. "That's your bay, dead ahead, isn't it? We go over it and straight on to Hjelmstad, right?" Bergman checked the landmarks. "That's right, Roy. Straight ahead on this course." "Keep your eyes open," Grenville warned him, "particularly in the sun." The sunken mountains drew nearer, painfully slowly from that height, until at last they crossed the coast. Bergman experienced all the bitterness of the exile as he stared down. Below was his homeland, and yet for him to set foot on it was a desperate venture. His bitterness against the Nazis served his body like fuel, steeling it against the crippling cold. The alert would have sounded now, and German fighters would be leaping off from their snow-covered airfields. Yet the mountains of the Antarctic could not have looked more desolate than those that passed slowly under their wings as they approached Hjelmstad. Bergman was tense in his turret, timing their flight from the coast to the town. It was just 5 minutes and 18 seconds when Grenville spoke to him again. "I'm starting to circle it now. Okay?" "Okay, Roy." The town was partly camouflaged under its covering of snow. From their height, it looked little more than a hamlet squatting between two mountain ranges. They took a wide circle over it, their condensation trails and exhaust gases forming a gigantic ring. They had been flying so long now that the roar of the engines had faded into a neutral background. Bergman dimly felt that he had lost all contact with the earth and was floating bodiless in the vast, silent stratosphere. Granville's voice brought him back to reality. "I'm turning off now for your fjord. Let Hoppy know when he can get cracking." Behind him, Bergman saw the distant coastline tilt and wheel round as the Boston banked onto her new course. Mountain range after range slid below them, the fjords looking like pieces of bent silver wire threaded through them. With the aid of the map he and Adams had studied earlier, he saw that they were now approaching the upper reaches of the Svartfjord. He gave rapid instructions to both Grenville and Hoppy. Almost imperceptibly, the Boston swung a few degrees to starboard. Bergman craned his neck sideways. Two parallel mountain ranges, separated by a thread of silver, were sliding towards them. One mountain peak was shining with a brilliance that made it stand out even from the surrounding snow. Bergman grabbed his mask. "There it is, straight ahead. If you watch, you'll see the sun shining on the glacier. See it? Now, if we're correct, it should be reflecting enough light downwards for us to take the photographs. The building is right below it." Grenville was silent. From his cockpit ahead of the main plane, he could see something the Norwegian had missed. A thin film of stratocirrus that was drifting slowly in over the fjord. It was no more than 2 miles wide and tenuous enough for the ground to be seen hazily through it, but it was more than enough to fog the camera plates. Hoppy confirmed this a moment later. "Oh, that cloud's going to ball things up, skipper. Can't we drop under it?" Grenville cursed. Hardly a wisp of cloud all the way from the Shetlands, and yet there had to be one drifting right across their target. He eyed the stratocirrus, making rapid calculations. It looked at about 24,000 feet, 6,000 feet below them. Not far, but it was those last few thousand feet that counted. Fighters would be swarming up now like tigerfish from the seabed. They would reach 20,000 feet quickly, but from then on their power curve would begin to fall away. If he dropped lower, he was playing right into their hands. He spoke sharply to Bergman. "Now look, forget the security stuff for a moment. We can go under that cloud, but it's going to be a gamble. We might make it, but so might the fighters, and if they get above us, it'll be curtains. Can this job wait for another day? Does it matter so much if a kite comes here under escort?" "We want to avoid that if possible, Roy. It'll give too much away." "Then this thing is important enough for us all to risk our necks." "It's terribly important, Roy." "So you'd like me to go down and chance it?" "I'd like you to, yes." Without another word, Grenville pushed the nose of the Boston down. He did not dive steeply. They were still a mile or two from the end of the fjord, and he didn't want to make his descent conspicuous. The altimeter needle swung slowly around the dial. 29,000 feet. 27,000. 25,000. Grenville's teeth were clenched and his hands sweating. The Focke-Wulfs would think he had gone crazy. At 23,500 feet, they reached the cloud, passing through it in a second. It was useless for concealment, yet would silhouette them perfectly to the climbing planes. There was no flak, a favorable sign. Jerry was not suspicious of their intentions and didn't want to disclose the importance of the building below. Grenville straightened out, and following Hoppy's instructions, began tracking over the target. A few seconds later, Hoppy began taking his photographs. Grenville, certain now that the building below was their ultimate target, stared down curiously. The mountains flanking the narrow Svartfjord were clearly of great height. On its western side, right at the end of the fjord, was a bulbous top mountain capped by the glacier. Bergman had pointed it out, and it was easily distinguishable by its mirror-like brilliance. Directly below it, at the bottom end of the enormous cul-de-sac, Grenville could just make out a dark building through his binoculars. Although dwarfed by his altitude, it was clearly one of considerable size. Surrounded on three sides by precipitous mountains, with its only ingress the deep and narrow Svartfjord, it looked completely impregnable. Grenville could make nothing of its purpose. Slowly it fell behind them as they droned on. Grenville lifted his eyes, stared ahead, and held the plane steady. The Svartfjord angled away from them now as they continued on their undeviating course. Hoppy's voice came through. "Okay, Skipper. Photographs taken." Before he had finished speaking, Grenville had put the Boston's nose up, fighting to regain the altitude they had lost. They were still within their time limit, but God knows what 7,000 feet was worth to the Focke-Wulfs. His eyes, sore with the strain, searched the sky incessantly. The Stratocirrus had been wider than he had thought, and was still visible behind. As he turned his head, his heart gave an explosive thud. A brilliant spot flashed for a second on one side of the cloud, then darkened underneath it. They were here and had altitude on him. Only one thing to do: go down. As he slammed his stick forward, his brain was racing like the screaming engines in either wing. He snapped his orders to Bergman. "Listen, they've made it. They'll be down on us in a minute or two. Keep your head and don't fire until they're right on top of you. Try to remember all I told you about deflection. Don't panic, and keep telling me which side they're attacking from. I'll help you as we go along, okay?" Bergman's mouth was suddenly dry. "Okay, Roy," he muttered. The Boston's nose dropped more steeply. Bergman peered upwards through his smoked glasses. He thought he saw 3 black dots silhouetted against the blinding glare. The Boston was howling earthwards now, its wings and body trembling with the speed. To Bergman, looking back along the fuselage, it seemed the shuddering tail unit would break off at any moment. Then he saw the Focke-Wulfs clearly for the first time. One was close, already within 1,000 yards, the other 2 more distant. He shouted to Grenville, "3 of them, closing in on our tail." Instantly Grenville pulled out of the headlong dive. The Boston groaned in agony, rivets springing, paint cracking off its tortured wings, tail planes whipping like the tail of a child's kite. The Focke-Wulf was still there, 20-odd degrees to starboard. Bergman stared with fascination at its short, quivering wings, its long, transparent hood, and its huge radial engine. The olive-green upper surfaces of its wings, with their huge black crosses, showed vividly as it swung into position. In the brilliant sunlight, it glowed like some great insect, beautiful and evil. Grenville's voice came over the intercom. "I'm turning to starboard to increase his curve of pursuit. He might black out. Watch him, and when he shudders, fire." The Boston heeled over steeply. Bergman, crouched behind his sights, saw the Focke-Wulf's wings tilt at a steeper angle as it tried to follow them. He understood Grenville's tactics now. At that speed, a steep banking turn increased the G, particularly for the fighter, which had to turn inside them to get the Boston in its fixed forward gun sight. The Focke-Wulf's wing tilted more steeply. Bergman could see its pilot clearly now, crouched forward under his long transparent hood. The Focke-Wulf was close, not more than 300 yards away. The Norwegian's spine cringed as he imagined his turret slowly sliding into the pilot's gun sight. At any moment he would open up with his cannon. Then the 190 faltered. Bergman saw the sudden blind flutter of its wings, the helpless drop of its nose. The pilot had greyed out for a moment. This was his chance. He put his sight on the radial engine and fired a long 4-second burst, 20 bullets a second hosing out from each of his Brownings. His tracer appeared to be striking, but now the nose of the 190 was coming up. Its pilot was recovering. Bergman fired another frantic burst, and this time black smoke began pouring from the fighter's exhausts. His propeller stopped, it banked sharply away, and began gliding earthwards. Bergman let out an exultant yell as he fired another burst after it. "I got him, Roy! He's broken off! I hit him!" Grenville's voice cut his words off in his throat. "Watch out, you fool! Watch out for the others!" Bergman glanced back, and his stomach shrank in fear. The 2 remaining 190s had closed in and were less than 400 yards away. As he stared at them, bright flashes ran along their wings. He twisted his guns back, but he was too late. Before his eyes, the Perspex turret splintered into white stars. He heard 2 shattering explosions and felt himself hurled backwards. There was a moment of intense pain, then nothing but red-streaked darkness. Grenville felt the Boston shudder under the hammer blows of the cannon shells. A second later, a shell tore through his hood. Air shrieked through the hole, buffeting his head backwards. Tracer flashed by like incandescent hail. He threw the Boston into a spin to simulate loss of control. As always, when near extinction, his brain became unnaturally lucid, gaining the ability to consider more than one problem at the same time. There was one faint chance of survival. He leaned forward, his eyes searching the spinning, reeling mountains that were leaping upwards to crush them. For the moment, the firing had ceased, but he knew the 190s were following him down, ready to open up again if he pulled out. He watched his altimeter needle. 5,000 feet, 4,000, 3,500, already below the level of some of those mountain tops. If he didn't pull out now, they were finished. Groaning with the effort, the Boston came out of her spin. Instantly, the Focke-Wulfs hurled themselves at her again. Explosive shells probed for her fuel tanks, for her engines, for the flesh of her crew. Ignoring the fire, Grenville searched for his objective. He found it not a mile ahead. Again he put the Boston's nose down. The scream of air through his shattered windscreen almost pierced his eardrums. A sunlit, snow-covered mountain peak flashed under his starboard wing, falling away dizzily into a tremendous gorge. The Boston followed the drop down, plunging into it like a meteor. Out of the sunlight now. Into the gorge, its towering walls fine smooth by the Boston's speed. Green water flashing below, foaming and cascading over the rocks. Grenville's jaw clenched with satisfaction. He had made it. He was flying inland up the narrow gorge that ran into the Svartfjord. Now he had a chance, even though the 190s were still behind him, lying astern, crazed with the lust to kill. The tremendous roar of the engines thundered across the narrow gorge, bringing down avalanche after avalanche of snow. The stress-skinned fuselage of the Boston shivered under the impact of 2 more shells. Grenville dropped lower. Focke-Wulf's guns, set up at 2 degrees, forced pilots to fly low and so avoid tail gunners. Use it against them now, that's it. He can't get you now without going lower still. Fox him. Draw him down. He'll be watching you, not the gorge ahead. Here's a waterfall coming. Hold it. Hold her down. Bit longer. Now. Like a leaping salmon, the Boston hurled herself up and over the waterfall. The 190 following behind had no chance. Before its pilot's reflexes could respond, the high shelf of rock was upon him. The plane vanished in an explosion of flame and spray. The pilot of the second Focke-Wulf lost his nerve and pulled out into the sunlight above. Grenville followed the gorge for its full length before emerging into a wide valley. There were no enemy aircraft in sight, but he knew the hue and cry would be on. At 0 height, the Boston turned for the coast. Hoppy's voice came hoarsely through the intercom. "Lummy, skipper. Thought we boarded that time. I could have washed me feet in that water. How's Bergman? Is he hit bad?" "We'll try to find out in a minute," Grenville muttered. Below the level of the treetops, taking all possible cover, P. Popsy headed for home. The private sitting room of the Black Swan was empty when the landlord showed Grenville into it. "She's in her room, sir," Kern said. "If you'll wait here, I'll give her a call." When the landlord had gone, Grenville glanced round the room. A bright fire was burning in the hearth, making the brass ornaments wink cheerily. He stood motionless, listening to the silence of the old inn. It had the profound, peaceful quality of old age. Then he heard her footsteps outside and felt his pulses quicken. She came in, recognized him, and smiled. He gave himself no time for hesitation. "I'm afraid I've some distressing news for you, Miss Bergman. Your brother's been wounded. Not seriously, but he'll be in hospital for 2 or 3 weeks." She fought and conquered the tremor in her voice. "Tell me what happened," she said quietly. "We were out on a photo reconnaissance. 3 Focke-Wulfs jumped us and your brother was hit. He was wounded in the right shoulder and suffered concussion." Where is he now?" "I had to leave him in the Shetlands. They made arrangements to get him to hospital. I made certain he was all right before I left." "What did you do this time?" she asked quietly. "I beg your pardon?" Hild looked him full in the face. "I'm sorry, but I can't help feeling bitter. My brother has had to fly many times since 1940, but his pilots, knowing the dangers he had to face on landing, have at least taken care of him in the air." Grenville tried to control his temper. "You don't think I tried to get him wounded, do you? This was his operation. My orders were that he should come on it, and this is the result." "What was the operation?" "Ask your brother. I was only the taxi driver." Hild moved over to the fireplace. With one arm on the mantelpiece, she stared down. The firelight seemed eager to touch her, running its glow over her slim body, limning its contours in shadows. A welter of emotion suddenly surged up inside Grenville. None was defined, but all seemed to gear up with his tension, inciting him to some act that would explode it away and bring him relief. Hardly aware of the movement, he drew closer to her. She looked up and saw how near he was standing. The firelight, growing in strength as the room darkened, shone full on his face, betraying much that the dusk had kept hidden. She saw the intense weariness in the shadows under his eyes, the resolution in the lines of his cheek and jaw, the bitterness and strain around his mouth. She looked into his eyes, where the fire glow was hot, and saw tiny miniatures of herself framed there. She frowned slightly, shaking her head. "I'm sorry. That was not fair of me. I should not say such things until I know more of what happened." It was this retraction of hers that triggered off Grenville's impulse. That, and something which sprang without authority into her eyes on seeing the desire in his own. He caught hold of her, jerking her towards him. Her mouth was parting in protest as he kissed her, and his lips imprisoned her words. Bergman returned from hospital 16 days later. It was a grey, blustery day early in February when he entered Grenville's squadron office. His right arm was held up in a sling under his naval mackintosh. A severely bruised cheek, still discoloured, gave a lopsided effect to his smile. "Hello, Roy. It's good to see you again." Grenville was on his feet, his own hand outstretched. For a moment, mixed with gladness, there had been a faint measure of uncertainty in his eyes. Now he was smiling, a rare smile that made him look almost boyish. "Hello, Finn. I didn't expect you out quite so soon." "It's good to be back. I've missed you all." Grenville laughed. "We haven't missed you quite so much. We've had a holiday from those crazy jobs of yours. What are you bringing us now? More trouble? Or later, perhaps. But at the moment, I'm bringing you something good. I heard they were coming this morning and persuaded the doctors to let me out. I wanted to see them arrive. You'll have heard, I suppose?" Grenville nodded. "Yes, Davis told us last week." He looked down at his watch. "You've timed it well. They're due here any minute." He lifted his eyes to the Norwegian's pleasant face. "Have you seen your sister yet?" "Yes, I called over on the way here." "Did she go to see you in hospital?" Bergman looked surprised. "Didn't you know? Haven't you been across?" I don't seem to have had much time, but I saw she was kept informed about you." "Hild told me. It was very decent of you. I hope you'll be able to get over more now." Bergman looked away, speaking with some diffidence. "I'd like the two of you to get to know one another, Roy. She hasn't any real friends over here. That worries me in case something should go wrong on one of these trips of mine. I know you'd see she was all right." "I shouldn't worry about her," Grenville said abruptly. There was a short, awkward silence. The sound of distant engines brought them both relief. Grenville jumped to his feet. "This sounds like them now. Let's go out and take a look, shall we?" They stood on the tarmac path, staring up at the grey, windswept sky. The sound of the engines was approaching fast, coming from the west. Grenville pointed over the humpbacked roofs of the Nissen huts. "There they are." 2 graceful shapes emerged from the low ceiling of cloud. They were long and slender, with a high tail fin and shapely, tapering wings. Their engines had a sweet, powerful note. They circled the airfield, banking steeply to follow its perimeter. One pilot feathered an engine and deliberately did a slow roll not 100 feet above the wet grass. "What a lovely job," Grenville breathed. The 2 planes drifted into land, as light as thistledown. They braked, then taxied towards the control tower. Grenville nudged Bergman's arm. "This looks like the job we've been waiting 3 years for. Let's go and have a look at them." Together, they walked across to make a closer inspection of the plane which, 8 days ago, had bombed Berlin in daylight for the first time. It was called the Mosquito. Davis arrived the following morning, holding the same audience in Barrett's office as on the previous occasion. "Well, gentlemen, you've got the first of your new aircraft," he began. "In another week, you'll be fully equipped. You won't be able to complain then that you haven't the tools to do the job, because you'll have the finest light bomber in the skies today. As you know, she recently did a daylight raid on Berlin. She was unarmed, relying successfully on her speed to bring her back safely. Wonderful job though she is, however, we've finally decided an unarmed kite, however fast, is a bit risky for the kind of jobs you might have to do. We next had a look at the fighter bomber version, but the snag there is that the cannon breeches extend back into the bomb bay, so cutting down the bomb load considerably, and your bays, as you'll have noticed, have been converted to carry the maximum load of 4,000 pounds. So, we had a chat with the makers, and they did a fine compromise job for us. To get the cannon in, they used 2 of the short barrel type and extended them in front of the nose. That gives room inside for the breeches. Of course, they couldn't give you 4. With a full bomb load, you'd be overweight. But they made up with 2 Brownings for good measure. Now, once your bombs have gone, you've got a kite that can match any fighter Jerry can put up. Any questions so far?" "I notice there's no hatch in the nose," said Grenville. "How does the observer use his bomb sight?" "He doesn't," Davis said. "For the job you're going to do, a bomb sight won't be any use. I'll explain that later. First, your conversion. I want it done quickly because I want special squadron training to start in less than 2 weeks. It's going to mean a lot of work and a lot of reorganization. Your gunners are going to become redundant. They'll be posted. Your remaining pilots and observers are going to have a lot to learn, and they've got to learn it faster than anything has been learned in the service before. Time's running short, and believe me, time is precious. This thing is bigger than I'd realized. Too damn big. Once you're crewed up and have got your kites, we're sending you up on a daily trip to Scotland. A couple of routes are worked out for you, which you'll always use to make things easier for the observer corps. Up there, we have a deep valley with a special target site waiting for you. As near as possible, it'll resemble the target you're being trained to hit. You've probably guessed by this time what that target is. I'm not allowed to tell you its purpose. I may never be allowed to, but I can say that you're out to destroy that building at the upper end of the Svartfjord. No man outside you 3 must know about that target. I can't stress enough the importance of secrecy. Now, a few words about training. This valley in Scotland is meant to represent the Svartfjord. Of course, it's nothing like so deep, but it's the nearest thing we've got. At one end of it, a target site is marked out. Not as you'd expect at the bottom of the valley, but instead in a corrie in the mountainside, under an overhanging clump of trees. That's where you'll practice dropping your bombs. The idea is to fly along the mountainside, bank steeply over, pull away, and as you go, release your bomb. Centrifugal force will then sling it at the target. You can see now how useless a bomb sight would be. It's an entirely new technique, and it'll take a hell of a lot of experiment and practice, but we think it can be done. In fact, it must be done. The real target is at the bottom end of a hellishly deep fjord that's over 20 miles long. We know that Jerry doesn't believe we have a kite that can make a worthwhile attack on such a target, and until the Mossy came along, he was right. However, he hasn't taken any chances. The target's too important. He knows that if an attack does come, the attacking force must fly inside the fjord for a considerable distance, probably from its mouth at the coast. No kite could prang the building from above, and equally no kite could dive down on it. The mountains make both impossible. So, Jerry has built flak posts all along the fjord sides. Lieutenant Bergman says he has everything lined up there. 88, 37 and 20 millimeters. Whole bag of tricks. If you've read your Tennyson, this is the Valley of Death. And if you flow down it as things are at the moment, you'd end up in far worse shape than the Light Brigade. Jerry, then, has been thorough. But our special services and Lieutenant Bergman haven't been sleeping either. The Norwegian Patriots over there have been organized and are waiting. They know their job. All they want now are the tools to help them do it. And this is one of your next operations. On a certain date in April, the lieutenant will be dropped in Norway again. There he'll contact the Patriots and make certain everything's ready. He'll send a message through to us, and on receipt of it, you'll go out one night on a supply-dropping job. Among other things, the equipment you put down will consist of light machine guns, ammunition, and grenades. At a given date, a week or two later, you'll go out before dawn, bombed up and ready. For weeks before this date, you'll have been going out at the same time, so that no one around will take particular notice of you. But this will be the real thing. You'll be going out to smash that building in the Svartfjord. In the meantime, Lieutenant Bergman and his men will be doing their stuff on the other side. They'll attack these gun outposts and overcome their crews in a surprise dawn attack. This will actually take place while you're airborne. The timing's most important. There's no chance of the Patriots being able to hold these posts once reinforcements arrive, and the building is so important, Jerry'll move heaven and earth to get them back once he's alerted. Fortunately, these outposts are in isolated places, mostly on high mountain slopes, so however fast Jerry moves, he can't recapture them under an hour or two. And in that hour, gentlemen, you'll be batting down that fjord in those new mosses of yours, heading straight for that building. You'll drop your special eggs in a special way, and then get out smartly. If all goes well, the building will be destroyed, and the Patriots will get away before the reinforcements arrived. That's the scheme, and it has to succeed. No one must even consider failure. The alternatives don't bear thinking about. The training of 633 Squadron went on right throughout April, but with two important changes. The first concerned their bomb load. Towards the end of March, they had started dropping 1,000-pound dummy bombs. Now each Mosquito was loading up daily with a single 4,000-pound monster, the plane's maximum bomb load, and sent out to fling it into the target area. Twice a week, lorries brought the specially constructed dummies back from Scotland to be used again. The second change concerned their time of takeoff. Until now, they had done the exercise in the middle of the day. Now they were ordered to be airborne at 0430 hours every morning. To crews already heartily sick of the valley and all it stood for, this was a most unpopular change. To make matters worse, and more incomprehensible, such an early takeoff meant that they had to stooge over the valley for over an hour before there was enough light to commence the exercise. On the surface, the order was received with stoical resignation, but in the privacy of billets, the comments from both air crews and ground personnel were lurid and descriptive. The training continued in the following weeks, and then at last it was time for Lieutenant Bergman to return to Norway. One bright, blustery morning, Bergman and Grenville stood on the airstrip beside the aircraft that was to take the Norwegian back to his native land. The first of the plane's engines fired, scattering a flock of sparrows that had landed alongside its starboard wingtip. Bergman, wearing a flying suit, helmet, and a parachute harness, turned to Grenville and held out his hand. "Well, this is it, I suppose. Up to Scotland, wait for a good weather report, then off we go." His accent sounded more pronounced than usual. "Goodbye, Roy, and the best of luck." As always when under the stress of emotion, Grenville's tone was brusque. "You need the luck, not us. Hang on to it, and don't take any chances." Bergman smiled. "I don't intend to get caught if I can help it." "Well, mind you don't," Grenville said curtly. Their eyes held a moment. Then Bergman turned for the plane. Grenville watched him enter it, and didn't move until the aircraft had taken off and was climbing steadily over the distant trees. He returned to his office, sat in thought for a few minutes, and then went to see Barrett. "Will you want me this afternoon?" he said. "No, Roy, I don't think so. Take a couple of hours off, if you like." "May I borrow your car?" Although it was the first time Grenville had made the request for himself, he had no doubt of the answer. Barrett's generosity with his car was proverbial. "Oh, you know where it is, Roy. Help yourself." Grenville returned to his office and phoned Hild. "Would you care to come out with me for a drive? I've got a couple of hours, and it's a fine day." Her low voice expressed her pleasure. "I would like that very much, Roy. What time will you be coming over?" Grenville picked her up at the inn 15 minutes later. He felt a disturbing sensation as she approached the car. She was bareheaded and wearing a dove-grey coat thrown loosely round her shoulders. Her face was flushed with pleasure as she slid into the seat alongside him. "This is a nice surprise, Roy." "I felt like getting away for a few hours," he told her as he drove away. "Is there anywhere particular you'd like to go?" "No. Please go wherever you wish. I should be quite happy." Grenville was aware of an odd lightness of heart. It was irrational because Bergman had gone, and he thought a good deal of the Norwegian. Yet the feeling persisted, growing even stronger as the airfield fell back out of sight. They chatted lightly for a while. then fell into a long, companionable silence in which words seemed unnecessary. They were driving over the moors with the sea a blue haze in the distance when she spoke to him again. "You are looking happier today than I have seen you look for a long time, Roy. What has happened?" Grenville's sense of guilt returned, particularly when he realized he had not given her the news. He kept his eyes on the twisting road ahead. "Nothing," he said. "It must be the day. It's good to see the last of winter." She laughed. "I thought you must have been given some nice, dangerous raid to look forward to." The lightness of his mood, already threatened by the stinging memory of Bergman's departure, suddenly vanished. On an impulse, he pulled up the car and turned towards her. "Why'd you say that?" The happiness on her face faded at his expression. "Oh, I'm sorry. Have I said something wrong?" "You think I like war, don't you?" He had already learned that she always spoke the truth, whatever the situation. She did now. "Yes, I have thought so." "Why?" "I'm not quite sure. Perhaps it is because you seem to spend so much time at the squadron, or perhaps it is because of what the others say." "Oh, what do they say?" "Well, that you are always thinking of war and working out new tactics." "That's my job," he said curtly. "Yes, I know, but do you think I enjoy it? Taking kids out to their deaths and then writing about it to their mothers afterwards? I hate war. I always have. But I also hate bullies. It's the one hate I've never been ashamed of, and just before the war, I had a holiday over in Germany and saw what the Nazis were doing. When I got back, I joined the volunteer reserve. Somehow, after that, everything else in life, marriage, a career, everything became unimportant until they were beaten and the whole filthy business was over. I like to think that there's a subtle difference between that and liking war." "Oh, don't be angry with me," she said quietly. "I had no way of knowing this. You make everyone else believe the reverse. Why do you do that, Roy?" He could not have answered her if he had tried. Instead, he told her about Bergman. As he had expected, she took the news without flinching, although the loss showed deep in her eyes. She gave a slight, protesting shake of her head. "Oh, I know he went this way thinking it would be easier for me, but I would have preferred him to say goodbye. I have a strange feeling about him. I've had it some time now. I feel he is going into great danger." "Well, he has gone, so there is nothing we can do. I suppose it had to come, sooner or later." "But we were talking about you, Roy. You said that to do your best in the war, it is necessary to deny yourself everything else. Is that true? Would not some things make it a little easier to bear? Perhaps even help you a little?" "What things? A girl? A wife?" Sadness tinged her faint smile. "Perhaps even they might be of some help." He shook his head abruptly. "No. I don't want any woman biting her nails over me every time I go out on a raid. I've enough to worry about as it is. A man's a fool to get mixed up with sentiment in wartime." "Can you prevent people being sentimental and biting their nails?" she asked softly. Fear of his own emotions made Grenville unnecessarily harsh. "You can if you prevent them getting any damn fool ideas. I've seen too many sobbing girlfriends and bereaved wives to give the world any more." She turned quickly away again, hiding her face. His next words, following the others like an echo, startled him. "After the war, it may be different, but no one can look that far ahead." She turned back to him immediately. Her voice had a soft singing note. "Some people can," she said. "Some people can wait a long time." In the days that followed, Grenville saw Hilda frequently. There seemed to be a new understanding between them, though they never pursued the conversation they had started on that first car ride. And then one morning, the brigadier called Davis and Grenville to his headquarters near the airfield. He spent a long time with them, and when he had finished, both men began to realize the enormity of the task that lay ahead of them. "You'll understand now the importance of all we've been doing," the brigadier said in conclusion. "That building must be destroyed. We can't even contemplate failure. Knowing it's important puts a heavy responsibility on you, Grenville, I realize that, but I felt you should be told. Are there any questions you'd like to ask? Grenville nodded. When are you planning to send us in? I'm not allowed to give you the exact date, but if everything goes well on the other side, it'll be less than a month. It has to be because... The brigadier broke off abruptly. Grenville followed his eyes and saw that a red bulb over the door was flickering urgently. The brigadier rose to his feet. That means a message has been sent through. Please excuse me while I see what it is. He came back 2 minutes later, looking a different man. His face was quite grey, and his mouth and cheeks pinched with shock. Both Grenville and Davis rose to their feet in alarm. The brigadier motioned to the air commodore. Davis, will you come with me, please? I have some serious news for you. Davis threw an anxious look at Grenville and followed the brigadier from the room. On their return, Davis looked as white as the elderly soldier. He addressed Grenville at once, his voice urgent. When do your kites get back from Scotland? Grenville glanced at his watch. Well, they should have been down 80 minutes ago. Tell me, didn't you once train your men to do skip bombing? You know, precision stuff with time delays? Puzzled, Grenville nodded. Yes, we were given that Groningen prison job 3 months ago. Of course, we haven't done any in these new planes. That's good enough, Davis interrupted curtly. He nodded to the brigadier and picked up the telephone. 10 seconds later, he had Barrett on the line. Barrett, Davis here. I want your mozzies refueled and armed in less than an hour. Yes, you can. Make 'em work like hell. The bombs are to be 500-pound MCs with 11-second delays. Got it? Right. Get your crews alerted. We'll be over as fast as we can and we'll give you the rest of the gen later. Now put me over to Adams, will you? After giving instructions to Adams on the maps and photographs needed for the briefing, Davis slammed down the receiver and turned to Grenville. You'll have to lead them in. The job is to hit a certain wooden building in Bergen. Don't ask me why, because no one's going to be told. There isn't any time to lay an escort on. It's a rush job and there isn't a minute to lose. If you go in at low level, surprise and speed should get you through. But if the worst comes to the worst, you've got armament on those mozzies of yours to fight back, thank God. 20 minutes later, Davis and the brigadier were in Barrett's office. Davis closed the door and then came to the point without preamble. Have you got everything moving? Barrett nodded. Apart from the briefing, we should be ready for takeoff in under an hour. Davis knew the magnitude of the task and nodded his appreciation. Well, we'll have to make the briefing as short as possible. I'm afraid we have some unpleasant news and a filthy job for you. The brigadier will give you the details. When the brigadier had finished speaking, Barrett's ruddy face was as shocked and pale as anyone's. Oh, good Lord, he muttered. Filthy isn't the word. Surely we don't have to carry things this far. Davis, highly strung, needed no more to set him off. You don't think we'd give such an order unless it were absolutely necessary, do you? Don't be a fool, man. Barrett had a big man's slow but resentful temper. At another time he might have taken offence, but he caught a glimpse of the brigadier's face. There were lines of agony around the soldier's grey eyes and stern mouth. Barrett made his apology at once. I'm sorry, he muttered awkwardly. It's just as bad for you, of course. The brigadier looked his full age as he stared through the window. It is a very necessary order, I'm afraid. You know the Nazis as well as I do. You can guess their reaction in a situation like this. They'll stop at nothing, and there's no doubt what is happening at this very moment. Indeed, we know it's happening. That's why there isn't a second to lose. He turned towards Barrett, his voice sympathetic. I agree men shouldn't be asked to do such a thing, and they wouldn't be if it weren't for devils like these Nazis. Your men are going out on an act of mercy, and that's the solemn truth. Barrett stood silent, then nodded slowly. Well, at least the men won't know, he muttered. But what about Grenville? Davis answered the question. He'll have to lead them in. He'll have to know. Yes, said Barrett quietly. I'll tell him. What in hell are you trying to say? Said Grenville in a tight voice. There was nothing subtle about Barrett, which in the circumstances was probably just as well. He took a deep breath. Roy, he said, you know what the Gestapo are like, don't you? You know what they do to anyone who has information they want. Well, supposing a friend of yours was caught by them, and in pain, and you couldn't rescue him. What would you do, Roy? What would you do if you had a plane and some bombs to drop? Grenville's face was chalk white. For God's sake, come out with it straight, Don. What has happened? Barrett put a big rough hand on Grenville's shoulder. I'm sorry, Roy. because I know you and he became good friends. But that building in Bergen is occupied by the Gestapo. And they've got Bergman and another poor devil inside it. They took Bergman early this morning." Grenville got up and walked to the window. There was a long silence. Then he swung round, his face disfigured by revulsion and hostility. "I'm not taking them out to do this. There's a limit, Don. There's a limit, even in this filthy war. You can have me arrested if you want, but I'm not taking them out. Roy, listen to me. This is an act of mercy. You've got to take them out. I'm not. And nothing you can say will make me do it. But if that building isn't destroyed and everyone in it, it will be." "What do you mean?" Barrett's face paled as realization struck him. You're not thinking of going alone. How can I take anyone else along now that I know what the job is? How can I? Tell me that." "But you'll never—" "I'm going alone, Don. It's that or nothing." It was getting quite dark outside when Adams heard footsteps approaching his office. It was Grenville. He stood a moment at the door, and Adams could not find the courage to meet his eyes. Grenville spoke. "I've come to look over the photographs and maps. I'm taking off at 04:15 hours. Adams said nothing. "Well, come on then," Grenville snapped. "You all want the job doing. Get those maps and photographs out. I want to do a good job, a nice, efficient execution." Adams opened a drawer and took out the relevant material. Grenville pulled one of the photographs from him and pointed at it. "That's the building, isn't it?" Adams nodded. "Yes, it's a sort of annex to the main Gestapo headquarters. As you can see, this building is on a piece of wasteland quite near the railway station. You can pinpoint it on your way in from the docks by using the nautical school in the Nordnesparken as a marker. Straight on, you come to the National Theatre, which is almost alongside the main Gestapo headquarters at the top end of the old Bullsplaza, a wide avenue with flower beds and trees down the centre. At the other end of the plaza is a tiny park, and then a small octagonal lake." He unfolded a large-scale map. "Here it is, the Lille Lungasven. Right behind it is the wasteland with the building, and beyond that is a lake or fjord called the Store Lungasven. You'll have to be careful over there. Jerry has plenty of flak alongside the station and over near this bridge, the Strombro. Here are photographs of the nautical school and the theatre." "I'm not planning to come in from the docks," Grenville said. "You're not?" "No. This is my way in. If I keep on the deck, I'll have the mountains covering me on both flanks most of the way." "What about the building itself? You say it's wooden?" "Yes. Until the Gestapo took it over, it was used as a warehouse. It's 3 stories high and about 50 feet long. It shouldn't be difficult to destroy if you get through all right." Grenville's lips twisted. "No, it shouldn't be a bit difficult to blow up a place like that. Well, thanks for the gen, Frank. If all goes well, I'll drop in tomorrow and let you know how things have gone." 5 hours later, a party of 4 men, huddled together for comfort, watched a lone Mosquito heading down the flare path. With screaming engines, it hurled its bomb-packed fuselage over the airfield fence with an abandonment that made all 4 men wince. None of them met the other's eyes as they turned away, nor did they speak. Their ears were filled with the sound of those engines, now fading into the silence of the night sky. The dawn broke grey and cold, and the wave-tops below the Mosquito snapped like the fangs of hungry animals. Grenville peered anxiously at the lightening horizon. He was 10 minutes late to his ETA. Either he was off course, or the meteorological forecaster underestimated the strength of the headwinds. He hoped fervently it was the latter, although any delay, whatever the cause, would be serious enough if the Focke-Wulfs came up at dawn. He was flying at just under 1,000 feet, and as the light improved, he dropped down to 100. It was another 5 minutes before he sighted land. At first it was a fog bank that appeared, clinging to the sea like a dusty cobweb. As he lifted the Mosquito over it, conical peaks rose from its flat surface like tiny islands. Instantly his eyes lifted to search the sky above. It appeared empty, and he gazed down again. The fog patch passed below him, as did the islands it was shrouding, but he knew now that he was not far from the coast. The tiny peaks were part of the Øygarden group, the long fence of islands that lay outside Bergen and the Nordhordland district. Another line of islands appeared, an unbroken chain this time, with banks of fog swirling in their hollows. Grenville leapfrogged over them, banking steeply, and dropped down another 50 feet. He was flying south-southeast now, with the islands guarding his right flank. He caught sight of a fisherman's wooden house, half a dozen goats feeding on a patch of bright grass, a clump of shrub, a cluster of wind-swept trees. A larger island appeared, a small jetty, 2 fishing boats at anchor, a hamlet, a woman waving an apron from the front door of a house. 2 minutes more, and land soared up on either side of him. Petrol tanks swept by, a group of large camouflaged buildings, 3 tall smoking chimneys. Not 200 yards from his port wingtip, a freighter was making her way up channel, her bow wash white against the shadowy sea. Grenville caught a glimpse of a brace of multiple pom-poms on her boat deck before his speed swept him by. No shots were fired, and 30 seconds later, a shoulder of land hid the ship from sight. The land on either side rose higher, became mountainous with denser vegetation of scrub and pines. Houses became more frequent, typical Norwegian country houses with wooden frames and high sloping roofs. Grenville was in a fjord now, and the water below him was calmer. His slipstreams shivered awake behind him as he streaked not 30 feet above it. He drew back his stick, and a town flashed below him. That would be Garnes. Garnes, and not a shot fired at him yet. He made a little altitude and scanned the sky above. Still no sign of fighters. He went down again, his eyes probing the green birch-covered mountainside on his right. He found the valley and banked steeply into it. Trees flashed under him. Mountains towered on either side. This must be the Isdalen Pass. Rocks, bright grass, trees. Then a long sheet of water, Svartediket. The green-wooded mountain on his left was Ulriken. Then quite abruptly, he was there. The pass fell away, and Bergen, beautiful in its cradle of 7 mountains, lay below him. Opposite was Lovstaken, a long, massive ridge that ran to the U-boat pen south of the city. Below was a broad lake, the Stor Lungrasven. It was dotted with small boats of all types. On its far side was a bridge. That would be the Strombro. On this side of the lake were railway lines and the station. He had banked steeply to starboard on leaving the pass, and was over the centre of the city before he got all his landmarks. Behind him he caught sight of the small octagonal lake Adams had mentioned. It was near the railway station, and behind it was a piece of waste ground. Gritting his teeth, he threw the Mosquito into a sharp 180-degree turn to port. Bergen, clean-looking in the early morning light, swam in a dizzy arc under his vertical wingtip. When he straightened out, he was flying inland again, along the Lofstaken range, with Bergen on his port side. From the corner of his eye, he caught sight of other landmarks, the Nautical School, the green roof of the National Theatre, the wide tree-lined avenue of the old Bullsplaza. But he needed no markers now. His target was in sight, standing alone like a diseased thing on the wasteland between the 2 lakes. He was travelling at well over 400 miles an hour when he pulled out over the lake, lowering the Mosquito down until her belly nearly touched the water. He opened his bomb doors, clicked down his selector switches, and fixed a building at the far end of the lake, dead in the centre of his gun sight. The accuracy of the guns alongside the railway was terrifying. 3 posts got Grenville's range at once. The water below him seethed as shells tore it into spray, blurring his windshield and hissing into steam on his red-hot engines. White puffs enveloped him, interspersed by black ones as the murderous 37mm joined in. A shell went clean through his bomb hatch without exploding, ricocheting off a 500-pound bomb. Another one burst near the starboard engine, making the Mosquito wince as shrapnel tore through its wing. A blinding flash came from the instrument panel, followed by an explosion that almost shattered Grenville's eardrums. There was the smell of cordite and burning rubber. Sparks spluttered from a damaged contact box. Outside, Tracer soared through the smoke like coloured streamers, graceful to watch and death to touch. Grenville was hunched down in his seat to gain what protection he could from his armour plating. The building was huge in Grenville's gun sight when a party of black uniformed figures began pouring out from it. Instantly, loathing drove all the other emotions from his mind. Here were the bullies he had always hated, Here were Bergman's torturers running for their lives. He kicked the rudder bar, brought them into his sights, and fired a long, vicious burst, his thumb tight down on the button. The Mosquito shuddered under the tremendous kicking recoil. Grenville soared on the rudder bar, hosing the stream of shells and bullets among the screaming men. The effect was murderous. The earth itself was churned into furrows, and men were thrown into shapeless heaps. The building swung back into Grenville's sights again. His 20mm shells smashed through its wooden walls, doing enormous damage. 200 yards, 150 yards. The lake fell away. He was over the wasteland now. 100 yards, 50... Now! He pressed the bomb release and jerked back on the stick. The Mosquito screamed upwards, missing the roof of the building by less than 10 feet. The 4 bombs, tail-fused and falling horizontally, hit the ground and bounded forward like flat stones on water. They smashed through the wall of the wooden building as if it had been cardboard and disappeared within. The wide avenue of the old Bull's Plaza streamed under him like a green ribbon. Ignoring the vengeful flak that was still following him, he banked steeply to look back. He was counting to himself. 7, 8, 9, 10... At 11 there were 4 simultaneous explosions. The building disintegrated, hurled upwards in a mushroom of red-cord smoke and splintered wood. Although the flak by the bridge would be reorganized now, Grenville was prepared to make a second attack for Bergman's sake if anything was left standing. But there was nothing on the waste ground but 4 blackened craters and a blazing pile of debris. No one could have survived that holocaust. Just after 1600 hours, Davis entered the intelligence room. There was a peaked look about his sharp face, and the usual briskness was absent from his movements. He motioned to Adams to remain seated, and tossing his cap on the table, sat down opposite him. "I've just come from seeing Grenville," he said, catching the anxious question in Adams' eye. "They've put him in Stanhope Hospital in Highgate. He'll be all right in a few days. He's got a nasty crack on the head and face, and a wrenched shoulder into the bargain. The head injury's the worst. There was slight concussion, and he's been a bit delirious, but they say none of it's serious. Anyway, I told him to keep him there for a few days. The rest won't do him any harm." Adams nodded his relief. He was lucky. I never thought he'd come out of it alive. "His type are hard to kill," Davis said with some pride. "Have you seen the camera films yet?" Adams asked. Davis showed some of his old spirit. "They were the first things I went to see when I got back. Aren't they terrific?" "It's a pity he had no way of photographing the destruction of the target," said Adams. Davis lowered his voice. "The Brigadier got confirmation 2 hours ago. That's what I came to tell you." "Was it completely successful?" "Yes, completely." "Well, does everything go on as before, then? Or don't you know yet?" Davis hesitated a moment before replying. "The Brigadier seems optimistic again. None of the Patriots has been arrested yet, so it doesn't look as if anybody talked. Yes, if nothing else happened, we shall go on as planned. We must. No option. I don't know the exact date we're supposed to go, but for some reason or other it has to be before the end of May. After that, the Brigadier reckons our chances of success are greatly reduced, perhaps gone altogether. So, we've no choice but to be ready." Grenville awoke from his doze and stared around the room. The walls were cream-washed, sterile and blank. A small cabinet stood alongside his bed, its glass surface littered with bottles. A polished electric stove stood near the half-open door. The air held the faint smell of antiseptics. He lifted a hand to his head. They had removed some of the bandages, but his jaw and mouth were still bound up. He shifted restlessly. 3 days of this was more than enough. He'd have another go at that confounded doctor when he came tonight. The ward sister's voice outside the door made him start. "Yes, you can go in. He's awake. But only a few minutes, please. And don't expect him to talk to you. His face is still bandaged up." "Thank you." Grenville's breath stopped at the sound of the second voice. His head jerked sideways, then he lay motionless, only his eyes moving as Hilda approached his bedside. She was wearing a grey, slim-fitting coat with a blue scarf at her throat and was carrying a large leather bag. A sunbeam made her uncovered hair shine with golden light. His panic-stricken mind searched desperately for comfort. Her appearance, her smile... She could not know the truth yet. She could not know what he had gone out to do. Thank God for that. "I had to come to see you," she said as the door closed, leaving them alone. "Frank told me where you were." Damn Adams! He wanted to close his eyes to save himself looking at her, but he couldn't. He wanted to beg her to leave, but could force nothing from his bandaged mouth. His eyes, the only part of his face visible, stared up at her mutely. She misunderstood their expression and looked anxious. "Well, Frank said you were not seriously injured. I had not expected to see you so bandaged. Are you in much pain?" He shook his head. Her grave, blue-grey eyes did not lighten. "For a while I almost hoped you were more seriously hurt, because then you would not have had to fly for a long, long time." She smiled at him sadly. "Why could you not have broken an arm or a leg, Roy? It would have made me very happy." As if ashamed of her seriousness, she flushed and took a large bunch of daffodils from the bag at her feet. She went over to a water bowl on the window ledge and began arranging them. "They brighten a room," she said defensively. "I picked them this morning from Mr. Kern's garden. You should see his fruit trees. The sun has brought out all the blossoms." She finished arranging all the flowers and turned back to his bedside, smiling. "You know, Roy, it is rather nice for me to do all the talking and to know that you cannot argue with me. It makes the words come easier somehow." The ward sister tapped on the door at that moment. Hilda's face saddened at the reminder. She hesitated, then laid a hand on his forehead. Grenville lay motionless, hardly breathing, not daring to think. "I'm coming to see you again as soon as I can," she said. "They say I may come on Tuesday." Grenville moved his head sideways, like a dazed boxer trying to avoid a blow. 3 more days. She would know by then. Someone will be bound to have told her by then. Her voice came from far away, yet with the purity of a bronze bell. "Somehow it is easier to ask you now. Roy, when you are better, please do not be long in coming to see me. It is so very lonely without you." She kissed his forehead, then ran quickly from the room. Granville closed his eyes. Something like acid was running into them, blinding them. 2 days later, the brigadier called Davis to his headquarters. "How is Grenville?" the brigadier asked as soon as they were seated. "How's he getting along?" "He's all right," Davis told him. "He's back with the squadron." The brigadier showed his surprise. "Already? But I thought you'd given orders for him to remain in hospital for a week." "I did," Davis muttered, shifting uneasily. "But it seems Miss Bergman went to the hospital to visit him." He saw a shocked look appear in the brigadier's eyes. "She didn't know about her brother at the time. As you know, the wire only arrived yesterday. But apparently she told Grenville she was going to pay him another visit shortly. He couldn't stand it, I suppose, so he returned to camp. In the circumstances, I thought it better for the station medical officer to attend to him. He's got the bandages off now, in any case." The brigadier nodded slowly. "Well, how's he taking it?" Davis shrugged. "It's difficult to tell. You know Grenville. But Adams thinks it's hit him hard." "Not hard enough to affect his morale?" The sharpness of Davis's reply betrayed his resentment of a war in which courage had to be evaluated as coldly as this. "I shouldn't worry about his morale. He'll attack the bloody thing because it's his duty to attack it. After what he's done already, I don't think anyone should have any doubts about that." The strain was telling on all of them. It was as well there was not much longer to wait. "Well, no one could admire Grenville more than I," the brigadier said quietly. "But you know the importance of this raid. At the risk of appearing soulless, we can't afford to overlook anything, particularly the morale of the man who's going to lead it." Davis was quite disarmed by this reply. "I don't think you've anything to worry about on that score. He'll probably try all the harder to prang it for all the misery it's caused. I know I would." Satisfied, the brigadier drew Davis towards a large contour model of the Svartfjord, which lay on the end of his table. "Now, this model has been built up from the photographs taken by Grenville and from Patriots on the other side. Here is exactly what I want your lads to do." Less than an hour later, the brigadier shoved aside a pile of papers and looked up at Davis. "Well, that's everything. The contour model and the photographs will be sent to Adams under armed escort this afternoon. Let Barrett and Grenville see them, and tell them and Adams all I've just told you. But not a word to another soul until the briefing. Tell Adams to keep this model out of sight, and to have a security guard around his office day and night." "And when is 0 hour?" Davis asked. "That's the one thing you haven't told me." "They'll go in on the 14th, 9 days' time," the brigadier said quietly. "At 0645 hours to be precise. That'll give the Patriots just enough daylight to do their job first. If all goes well, the gun purse will be in their hands by then. The rest of it'll be up to your boys. For all our sakes, let's hope they do a good job." Grenville waited in the hall while the innkeeper went upstairs to call Hilda. "Miss Bergman, Squadron Leader Grenville's here to see you." She came running breathlessly down the stairs, pausing on the bottom step. Her face was pale, and Grenville saw the glisten of crushed tears under her lashes. With an impatient movement of her hand, she brushed them away. She gave a smile, and the courage of it pierced him like a knife. "Hello, Roy. How good it is to see you." "Hello, Hilda. I'm sorry I've been so long in coming over." As he stepped forward, the shaded hall light fell on his face, revealing its heavy bruises. She let out a low exclamation of concern. "Oh, your face. Does it hurt you very much?" He shook his head, glancing towards the sitting-room door. No, I'm all right now." "Shall we go upstairs to my room? It will be quiet there." He did not want that, but could think of no suitable protest. In silence, he followed her up the stairs. He felt trapped and afraid. "I came to talk about Finn," he muttered. "I should have come before, but somehow—" "You had not fully recovered from your wounds," she said quickly. Relief came into her eyes, and he realized she had already found an excuse for his behavior. "It wasn't that," he protested, but she cut off his words with a fluttering gesture of her hands. "Oh, there's no need to apologize. I quite understand. You were not fully recovered, and the news came as a shock to you. I had forgotten what good friends you and he were." Her voice was like the sweet chiming of a clock, heard through the grip of a nightmare. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked uncertainly. His mind answered her. "Why? Because this is the last time I shall see you like this. You haven't heard yet that it was I who killed your brother. So it is kinder to destroy now that thing that makes your eyes so warm when you look at me." Another moment, and he knew he could never find the strength to do it. He dragged his eyes from her and looked down at his watch. "I haven't got long," he muttered. "I only dropped in for a few minutes." "You were going so soon?" He nodded, not meeting her eyes. "I'm afraid I must. The boys are throwing a party in Highgate, and I've promised to be there. I'm taking a friend of mine along. I'm late as it is. She's already been waiting over half an hour." His voice was deliberate with meaning. "It's as well we're old friends, or there'd be trouble." She looked dazed, unable to understand. He went on quickly. "She moved up here a couple of weeks ago, and got herself a room in Highgate." He saw the delayed action of the shock strike her now. Her words were as involuntary as a cry of pain. "A girl? But I had no idea. You have never spoken of her before." Grenville forced a sheepish grin, believing the bruised skin around his lips would split with the effort. "Well, I should have mentioned it, I suppose. Sorry if you got any wrong ideas." "But the things you said that day in the car, you said you did not want anyone worrying about you. You made it sound—" "Well, I made it sound simpler than it was," he broke in roughly. "So, when you said that after the war things might be different, you were talking of—" She turned suddenly away, moving as if blinded. Her face appeared frozen with shock, but tears were falling down her cheeks like the beads from a broken necklace. She made no sound with them, and the silence was like a tightening cord around Grenville's temples. He had to speak to break it. "After all, I've never pretended to be over-keen. You can't say that I have." Her eyes closed to hide her shame. "That is true, but I misunderstood the reason. I see now. The fault has been mine, not yours. Grenville had been praying for anger, not forgiveness. He turned quickly to pick up his cap, hiding his face. He heard her voice again, still bewildered. "But it is so hard to believe. You have never been unkind before. Why have you chosen this time to tell me? Why not before, or even a little later? I would so much like to know that." Grenville knew now that there was no gentle way of killing anything. He lifted the knife and struck. "Oh, surely that's obvious. I didn't tell you before because it was quite pleasant and I was enjoying it. I'm telling you now because she's come here and it has to end at once." He dared not hold out his hand, dared not touch her. At the door, he paused and turned back, with the excuse he was making certain of his murder. But his eyes failed him. He saw nothing but the white blur of her face and the misted brightness of her hair. And then he was outside, with the black fields and pitiless stars, a part of the agony that racked him. The briefing room was packed to capacity. At one side of the table on the platform, a group of men were conferring quietly. Among them were Davis, Barrett, and Grenville. The silence was aggravated by the shuffle of feet, the whispers of conversation, and the scratching of matches. In the centre of the table stood the contour model of the Svartfjord, covered with a cloth. The tension could be felt, catching at the throat. The group on the platform reached agreement, and Davis moved forward to face his young audience. The low mutters among the air crews ceased abruptly. "Well, chaps, here it is. The big show you've been waiting for. You've had a lousy time training for it. Now I'm going to try to fit all the pieces together." Davis stepped back alongside the covered model of the Svartfjord. He pulled the cloth away. The young faces before him craned forward, both curious and apprehensive. "This is the scale model of a certain fjord in Norway. It's very deep and narrow, over 20 miles long, and ends as a cul-de-sac. It is this far end that we're chiefly concerned with. A high waterfall drops down here and gives power to a hydroelectric plant at the bottom of the fjord. Built around this plant is another building the Germans have put up, a massive affair with walls nearly as thick as a U-boat pen. This is our target. This mountain is called the Trollfjell. It rises steeply to over 2,500 feet, retreats into a corrie a couple of 100 feet deep, then bulges out again into a massive overhanging summit. On this summit is a glacier called the Trollisen. The whole thing resembles a man's chest, neck, and head. The chest is the side of the fjord, the neck, the corrie, and the head, the overhanging summit. Add the glacier on top, and that gives you a crop of white hair. Now that's how the mountain and glacier got their names. Troll is a kind of Norwegian gremlin. Tomorrow morning, you're going to take off before dawn, just as you have been doing throughout your training. You're even going to fly north on the same track for 10 minutes. After that, you start playing a different game. Instead of going to Scotland, you're going to Norway. And instead of carrying dummies, you'll each have a special bomb apiece in your bomb bays. These bombs arrived 5 minutes ago and will be loaded straight onto your kites. You're scheduled to reach the mouth of the fjord at 0645 hours, from now known as Z hour. Meanwhile, at Z hour minus 30, a very brave band of Norwegian patriots will be clearing the way for you. If all goes well, they'll have the fjord guns out of action by the time you arrive. You fly straight in and make for the other end of the fjord. Once there, the fun starts. I don't think I need stress by this time that you don't drop your bombs on the target. As I've told you, it has massive walls and a very thick roof. You're flying low, and it will be impossible to achieve sufficient penetration to do any damage, even if your bombs were designed for that sort of job, which they aren't. Instead, we have quite a different scheme. As you've heard, this summit overhangs the fjord. Naturally, before the Germans built their project, they sent geologists up to check on it. Their reports were that it was safe enough and there were no risks of accidents. As you know, German scientists are working just as hard as our own to discover new weapons, and, like ourselves, hope to find something that will end the war quickly. Well, in this building, using some of the energy and byproducts of the hydroelectric plant alongside, the Germans are on to something big. Something so big, in fact, that it might have a far-reaching effect on the outcome of the war if it isn't destroyed. The German geologists passed the old gremlin's head as safe, but we heard an interesting story through intelligence channels. A Norwegian geologist, who examined it before the hydroelectric plant was built, says there's a fissure at the back of it.
Now, normally, this fissure is completely covered by snow and ice, but every summer the ice retreats a little, and apparently the summer he made his examination was an exceptionally warm one. He was able to study the fissure in detail and found that the perennial dripping of water had hollowed it out inside to a considerable depth. Now, you know the way you've been dropping, well, a better word will be hurling, your bombs into a corrie in the side of that valley in Scotland. Well, tomorrow morning you're going to hurl those special bombs into the corrie under old Trollfjell's head. These bombs have been specially designed to give maximum blast effect, or, to put it neatly and scientifically, to start up severe shock waves. Now, shock waves are greatly magnified in effect when they enter solids, like earth or rock. They become tremendously destructive. Normally, the blast from a surface bomb goes upward into the air, where it's wasted. But in this case, the shock waves from your bombs will go upwards into this overhang and shiver up to the fissure like a seismic disturbance. Our scientists haven't been able to calculate exactly how many bombs it will take, but they are confident that a succession of explosions will fracture that fissure. They will fracture it more and more until the front part of the overhang comes crashing down. You'll guess now that everything has been most carefully worked out. The date, for example, is most important. At this time in May, the snow and ice on the summit is ideal for an avalanche. It's beginning to thaw, but still has lost nothing of its mass and weight. If part of the overhang goes, the ice and snow goes with it, and that'll be curtains for anything in the fjord below. When you drop your bomb, remember all you've practiced. Get as far inside the corrie and as much underneath the overhang as you can. We want to give it the maximum shock possible. Once you've dropped your bomb, beat it straight out of the east end of the fjord, or you'll clutter up airspace, and that's one of the things we should be short of. Right then. That's all. Off you go to bed. You'll be called at 0330 hours sharp. Good luck.
It was cold in the operations room the following morning, and no amount of attention could coax any heat from the radiators. Nevertheless, none of the 4 waiting men could pull himself away to make inquiries about the heating plant. Adams was sitting huddled in a chair near to one of the dead radiators. Davis was at the foot of the operational map on the wall. The brigadier was seated at the end of the long table, and Marsden, the chief signals officer, with headphones at his ears and a message pad before him, was hunched over a small table at the opposite side of the room. Davis turned his sharp, resentful eyes on Adams.
"I wonder how Barrett's getting on," he said. "I shouldn't have been fool enough to let him go."
In spite of the reserve crews and replacements, 633 Squadron had found itself 1 trained pilot short. Barrett had offered to fly without a command. Davis had had his doubts. Barrett was not a fit man, but in the circumstances had felt forced to agree. Now he was regretting his decision.
"The idiot'll probably go and kill himself. He'll probably run his kite into the side of a mountain."
He glanced at his watch.
"Oh, they should be coming up to the coast in less than 15 minutes.
The telephone alongside Marsden gave a sudden buzz, an urgent sound that made Adams jump. A second later, the brigadier was at the table, taking the receiver from Marsden. As he leaned forward to take the message, a premonition of disaster shot through Adams like the stab from a decayed tooth. The brigadier let out a sudden gasp of dismay. He dropped the receiver and turned towards Davis. His face was grey and drawn, with a look about his eyes that shocked the others. "We've just had a message from one of our Norwegian agents on the other side. He was wounded, but managed to escape and reach his transmitter." Davis's voice was suddenly shrill.
"Don't tell me they haven't managed to capture the flak posts."
"Worse than that. They haven't even had the chance to try. The Gestapo rounded up every man during the night. They've left it to the last minute in the hope of trapping the squadron in the fjord."
"But how could they have known?"
"And it wasn't Bergman who talked. It was Eriksson, the poor devil they captured the same day. The Gestapo must have passed on the news before Grenville destroyed the building." Davis swung round on Marsden.
"Get Grenville on WT."
Grenville acknowledged their call sign 30 seconds later. Davis thrust a scribbled message at Marsden.
"Send this. Guns still in enemy hands. Abort mission and return to base immediately."
A long minute passed. Davis glanced anxiously at the brigadier.
"Oh, don't say the Focke-Wulfs have got them."
Another 15 seconds passed, before Morse buzzed again. Marsden swung round on Davis. "Grenville says he's called for volunteers, and the entire squadron say they'll go in with him. He requests permission to continue." Not even the magnitude of the disaster could keep the glowing pride from Davis's voice as he turned to the brigadier. You hear that? Every man jack of them has volunteered. What shall I reply?" The brigadier was looking overcome with emotion. His words expressed his inner conflict. "Oh, there'll never be another chance. And it is desperately important. And yet—" So were his friends' lives, the listening Adams wanted to cry out. He winced as the brigadier turned back to Davis. "Oh, if they've volunteered, then I must say yes." He paused, then said quietly, "I'm very sorry. Please believe that." Davis's voice had a dry, proud sob as he glanced down at the waiting Marsden. "Send this. Permission granted. God bless you all." "God help you, you mean," Adams thought bitterly. The mosquitoes were riding as tight as a troop of horsemen, stirrup to stirrup, nose to tail. Every man was aware of an odd kinship between himself and his machine that morning. The powerful engines seemed to merge their vitality into his own. The speeding wings seemed to be an extension of his young, powerful arms. The spirit of sacrifice made it a madly intoxicating feeling. In the few minutes given him, Grenville had made his plans. To deceive the enemy as long as possible their trap was still a secret, he would fly almost into the mouth of the fjord. Then, at the last moment, he would swing south and fly parallel to the fjord until he reached the gorge that had helped him and Bergman to escape during their reconnaissance flight. If the squadron were led into the Svartfjord that way, they might escape half of the guns waiting for them. Theoretically, that would double their chances, although a devil voice in his mind reminded him that 00 was still naught. The entrance of the fjord was taking detailed shape now. The grim, soaring rocks, the dense clumps of birch, the seagulls cluttered around some object in the water. Beyond the entrance, men could see the twisting, shadowy fjord beckoning them inside. The entrance was barely 400 yards away when Grenville suddenly swung his Mosquito into a tight 90-degree turn. Another 90-degree turn to port this time, and the line of mosquitoes was now speeding inland, parallel to the Svartfjord, with its own flanking mountains protecting them. A tense minute and a half passed before Grenville spotted the gorge and swung towards it. His voice snapped out over the RT. "Attention all Vesuvius aircraft. Follow me at 20-second intervals. Repeat, time alteration, 20 seconds. Each man notify me the moment he enters the Svartfjord. Green sections 1 and 2 jettison bombs and attack flak posts. Go now." As he finished speaking, Grenville dived into the narrow gorge. The noise of his engines reverberating from the steep walls of rock made the Mosquito shudder. Trees and bushes, growing precariously from crevices, reached out as if to seize his wingtips. Then, quite suddenly, the gorge fell away, and he was in the Svartfjord. Here, barely 8 miles from its eastern end, it was a grim and savage place. From the black water below that looked like oil, the mountains shelved steeply upwards, their lower slopes covered in scrub, their upper slopes rising as sheer as the walls of some enormous prison. Impressions registered themselves indelibly on Grenville's mind. The grey clefts among the black rocks caused by melting snow, the rockfalls that had left inverted funnels of scree, the wisps of snow in crevices, the golden ledge of sunlight far above, a waterfall up there bursting into a rainbow. And then, suddenly, all hell broke loose. A huge eye suddenly winked from the shadowy mountainside, and a glowing chain of shells came swirling towards him. 2 more guns opened out on the opposite side of the fjord, then one from above. A line of red-cored white puffs burst dead ahead. A vicious explosion just beneath the Mosquito's fuselage made her rear like a frightened horse. Grenville's earphones crackled a few seconds later. "M-Mother calling, Skipper. I'm entering the fjord now." That was Milner, bringing up the rear. Grenville had never seen flak like this before. Tracer squirted out from clumps of trees and from rocky eyries, lacing the fjord with a deadly net of steel. Shells came reaching out, slowly at first, then with diabolical speed. A succession of black explosions rocked the Mosquito and gashed her port wing. A 37mm gun trying to bracket her. Grenville pushed up his face mask. "Vesuvius leader calling green sections. Attack now. Go." Grenville knew the distraction they caused could not help him. They could not pinpoint the guns until they opened fire on him, and before they could make their attack he would either be passed or shot down. But it should afford some relief to the Mosquitoes entering the fjord at 20-second intervals. One half of Grenville's mind was on the mission, checking, calculating, deducing. The other half was engrossed with the business of keeping alive. A massive rock face, black-bearded with trees, thrust itself at him from out of the smoke. He hugged it closely, trying to find cover from the flak, and nearly impaled himself on a double-pronged fork of tracer that stabbed upwards from a clump of trees. Seeing the shuddering flashes open up, he instinctively slammed his stick forward and kicked the rudder at the same time. The Mosquito skidded away, a whiplash of steel snapping 2 feet above its fuselage. The twin barrels swung down viciously, but Grenville had banked into the cliff again, and his speed carried him to safety behind a rock shoulder. Alongside Grenville, his white-faced observer sank back into his seat again. Phillips was a replacement for Hoppy, who had been injured a week ago. Among Grenville's complex thoughts was sympathy for a man thrown into such a mission at short notice. He found himself counting, and realized that some cell of his mind had been doing so ever since hearing Milner, who was bringing up the rear, enter the fjord. 35 seconds, in distance covered, about 2.5 miles, at least 5 more to the target. The lichen-stained rocky walls of the fjord streamed by, their shadows lit up by the rapid flashes of automatic guns. Another mountain spur deflected the fjord from its course. Grenville took this one wide, kicking his rudder bar left and right as he went by. The fire this time came from 2 posts on the rock face above them. Dazzled by the tracer, Grenville crouched down. Coloured lights flashed by the Perspex windshield. Deadly white puffs cast a hail of shrapnel in all directions. There was a sharp metallic crack, a jerk, and the smell of burnt rubber and cordite. A hollow voice echoed round Grenville's mind as if his skull were a cavern. "This is it. Here it comes." But miraculously they were past, and still alive. The fjord widened as the spur fell behind them, and the fury of the flak lessened for a moment. 45 seconds. Only 45 seconds since he had entered hell. He glanced back. The fjord appeared blocked with an impenetrable curtain of smoke trails and bursting shells. 6 lines of tracer were converging on an invisible point, probably Milner. Nearer, looking frail and tiny against the massive rocks, a Mosquito was diving on a flak post with all 4 guns ablaze. Far above he saw a black speck soaring over the jagged rim of the fjord, either another of his Mosquitoes or a Focke-Wulf. He did not know which. His lips drew back painfully as he remembered the Focke-Wulfs. They would not venture into this hell of flame and shrapnel, but they would be waiting up there to pick off any survivors. They were a problem to which he had found no answer. But they could wait. They were a full minute away. A row of flashes appeared above an approaching tree line. God, how many guns are there in this place? The fjord straightened out again, and at last Grenville could see Trollfjell. Alongside it, at the extreme end of the fjord, was the high waterfall that fed power into the hydroelectric plant below, and built around this plant was the huge concrete building that was their target, massive and seemingly impenetrable. On the banks of the fjord, half hidden by birch and firs, were dozens of small huts. He guessed these were living quarters. But there was no time for curiosity. At this last line of defence, the flak posts were more numerous than ever, and their gunners no longer exultant, but desperate. The entire area around the building lit up with the flash of guns, and their stunning thunder brought minor avalanches down from the surrounding heights. Luminous balls of tracer crisscrossed the sky around the weaving plain. The coloured glow from their shells reflected back from the dark water below. The Mosquito shuddered and rocked like a cockleshell caught in a typhoon. Grenville heard his number 5 calling, but now his whole attention was focused on the mountain that was leaping forward at nearly 5 miles a minute. It loomed nearer, crushingly near, so near that he could see the flak shells hitting it and sending rock splinters flying like shrapnel. Phillips had opened his bomb doors, and he could feel them quivering in the airflow. The red light on his bomb distributor panel was glowing, and Phillips had fused the bomb. Airspeed was right. Everything was ready. The Mosquito flashed into the rock-strewn corrie. Below it were the wooded slopes that led down to the water. Above it was the massive overhang with its thousands of tons of rock and ice. Oblivious now of the raging flak, Grenville pinpointed his aiming mark, a huge boulder where the neck curved outwards. He watched the red paint mark on his port nacelle, speaking slowly into his intercom. "Coming up now. Easy. Easy." The Mosquito was on her side now, her wings vertical with the cliff. The red mark was almost in line with the boulder. "Ready. Ready." With all his strength he pulled the Mosquito away. "Now!" he shouted.
and Phillips pressed the bomb release. The Mosquito shot away as if ricocheting from the rocks. The huge bomb, released in the steep turn, catapulted away to crash among the debris of loose rocks at the foot of the overhang. Grenville found himself shooting across the fjord like a rocket, with the vengeful flak following him. The imperturbable voice in his mind was counting again. 3, 4, 5... He pulled back on the stick, going into a steep climbing turn that lifted him towards the blue sky above. 6, 7, 8... The flak was following him up. A blinding flash burst dead ahead, and long gashes appeared near the port wing route. Not a second later, another shell burst in the nose, shrapnel ripping through pneumatic pipes and electric cables, the cockpit filled with the stink of cordite and fumes from the escaping hydraulic fluid. Air screamed through the shattered nose, adding a banshee wail to the sound of the engines. Alongside Grenville, Phillips sagged unconscious in his seat. 9, 10... The Mosquito suddenly burst out into the clean morning sunlight. Flak still followed it like lava being tossed up from the bowels of a volcano. Grenville should have taken cover over the rim of the ridge, but instead he turned back. 11, 12, his mind chanted. Half a second later, the bomb went off. Every detail below became etched in brilliant light. The volcanic appearance of the fjord was increased by the cloud of stones and rubble thrown upwards by the tremendous explosion. The Mosquito reared and almost turned over in the blast. Still dazed from the flak, Grenville fought the controls, his eyes on Trollfjell. But the massive overhang had not moved, although small falls of rock and ice were still sprinkling from it. Henderson, his number 2, came over the radio. "Am going in now, skipper." 20 seconds was a perilous margin between attacks. But because of the waiting Focke-Wulfs, it was imperative to get the planes into the fjord as quickly as possible. Grenville was gambling on the mountain spurs protecting the attacking plane from the explosion ahead, and it seemed as if the gamble would pay off. Of course there was danger from rockfalls, but that was nothing compared with the flak. From above, Henderson's tiny Mosquito looked like a dragonfly being pierced by a dozen brightly coloured pins. Somehow it got through, and vanished for a breathless moment into the deep shadows under Trollfjell. Then it came shooting out, and began corkscrewing upwards. "OK, skipper. Bomb gone." Grenville was just congratulating Henderson when a row of 8 black bursts cut the climbing Mosquito in 2. Her right wing tore off at the root, fluttering away like a leaf. The asymmetrical fuselage spun down, trailing black smoke and a shred of flame from its port engine. The flame lengthened, brightened. There was a sudden brilliant flash, then nothing but a glowing ball of fire that dropped like a plummet into the dark mass of trees below. As if in revenge, the bomb Henderson had planted burst 2 seconds later. This time a heavy sheet of snow cascaded from the summit and fell among the shrubs on its lower slopes. But the massive head of Trollfjell still towered over the smoke and falling debris. Flying as Grenville now was in the opposite direction to Trollfjell, the flak did not pay him much attention for the moment. He stared down. Far below, Ailif was commencing his run-in. The flak caught him the moment he stopped weaving. A thin stream of burning glycol from his starboard exhaust showed white against the shadows. It turned black a second later. A thin tongue of fire licked back, lengthened, a bright explosion among the rocks. Ailif was gone. Not 3 seconds later, far up the fjord, flak got his number 4. The curving plume of flame and smoke, the pathetic shower of sparks against a rock face, they could mean nothing else. Whatever the cost now, they had to get more bombs on Trollfjell. Grenville called up his green section, only to hear Young's Australian drawl come back wearily. "We're doing our best, skipper, but there's only Archer and me left." And not 10 seconds later, Archer went, caught by a 190 as he came up blinded after attacking a 20mm post on a rock shelf. Trollfjell was still there. Grenville could see its ugly head in the distance as he raged over a mountain shoulder. Bitterness was swilling about inside him like acid. What fool had thought of this idea, throwing men against a mountain in the hope of bringing it down? The Focke-Wulfs above were buzzing about like flies over a jam-pot. Occasionally one of them would screw up enough courage to venture down over the rim of the inferno, only to draw back hastily a few seconds later. But they were ready, waiting like hawks for any survivors. "I've had it, skipper. Sorry." That was young Parsons. He was hit as he cleared the last mountain spur. His smoking Mosquito tried to pancake into the fjord, crashed in a cloud of steam, and turned over. The loss of his crews was driving Grenville frantic. He called down Young, the last survivor of his green section, and ordered him to escort number 9 while he flew ahead of number 8. Perhaps by flying in pairs with 50 yards between each pair, they might thin out the intensity of the fire. Number 8 was Barrett. As Grenville dived over him to take up position, he saw the wing commander's squirrel-brown moustache clearly as Barrett leant back and waved at him. Grenville tried to remember the sights of the flag posts as he led Barrett by them. The fire from them was thinned a little, but only relatively. Not a mile behind them, Young followed, leading his number 9. The smell of leaking hydraulic fluid was severe now. Grenville pulled up his oxygen mask and turned the taps on to emergency. His heart was hammering, both from the tension and the sheer physical effort of throwing the Mosquito about in the narrow fjord. The last mountain spur approached, and with it the flak post that had got Parsons. Its multiple pom-pom gave Grenville a burst, then, as if knowing who was carrying the bomb, turned its full fury on Barrett. A flash on his port engine, and a piece of cowling was torn away. Another flash, and a leg of his undercarriage dropped like a broken claw. Then they were past. Grenville's mouth was dry. "You all right, Don?" "Still around, Roy. Now, where's that gremlin?" The massed flak posts round the building opened up like the roll of drums before an execution. 2 shells went right through Grenville's tailplane without exploding. Barrett's voice came longingly over the radio. "Hell, Roy, wouldn't it be just a job to drop the bloody thing right on top of them?" Grenville led him almost under the massive overhang before turning away. He was unable to see Barrett drop his bomb, but heard its excited voice a few seconds later. "Right on the button, Roy, or as near as, damn it, anyway. Now let's get out of here." Doubting Barrett's skill, Grenville could only hope he had been as accurate as he believed. He fought for height through the thundering flak, Barrett following him. Just under the lip of the fjord, he levelled out and waited for Barrett's B Bobby, with his dangling undercarriage, to come alongside him. "Any second now, Roy. Watch for it," Barrett shouted. Grenville held little hope of bringing down Trollfiel now, and was busy watching the sky for fighters. Barrett was staring intently down. The familiar blinding flash came, the upflung shower of rocks, the blast, and then Barrett's hysterical voice. "Roy, it's going! The bloody thing's going! Look!" Startled, Grenville looked down. The massive head of Trollfiel appeared to be wobbling drunkenly. Then, as if split by some enormous mason's chisel, the front section of it slipped away and toppled into the void below. The noise could be heard above the roar of the engines, an earth-shaking thunder as thousands of tons of rocks, followed by the dislodged mass of the glacier, plunged 3,000 feet into the fjord. An irresistible force, terrifying to watch. It hit the lower slopes and bounded forward like a tidal wave. It swept over trees, huts, flak posts, hydroelectric plants, and concrete buildings, grinding them and crushing them as a steamroller flattens out an ant-heap. It set off enormous echoes that reverberated across the fjord for minutes. "My God," Barrett said, awestruck. All the firing had stopped. Even the Focke-Wulfs had broken off their vigilance to stare down aghast. But one flak-post commander, more phlegmatic or perhaps more revengeful than the rest that had survived, saw the Mosquitoes approaching and snapped out orders that pulled his shock crew together. Grenville had just finished transmitting the code word that would send Davis delirious with pride when he saw the red flashes open up dead ahead of them. He yelled a warning to Barrett and swung sharply away, but Barrett's reflexes had lost their edge through lack of combat flying, and he turned too late. Tracers stitched a line of holes the full length of his fuselage. Grenville's voice was sharp with anxiety. "Don, are you all right?" No answer. Grenville flew closer until he was right alongside. "Don, how bad is it?" He could see through B. Bobby's transparent hood now. The observer was lolling sideways against his harness, and Barrett was huddled over the stick. "Don, for God's sake, get the hatch away. Try to bail out." A ghost voice answered, 1,000,000 miles away. "No good, Roy. No good." The whisper died away, and the Mosquito's nose dropped wearily. Steeper, steeper, one wing dipping as she went, down, down, out of sight, a red glow staining the shadows of the fjord.
Grenville went back to look for the gun post. His face was that of a devil. With the target destroyed and his crews virtually wiped out, he was at last able to give full vent to his bitterness. He set the flak post with exquisite care in his gun sight as he came back along the ridge. It was not enough to blast it with shells, however. Pure hate is never satisfied with long-range killing. He was going to hurl the Mosquito's white-hot engines on the gun crew. They were to be killed for many things, not least for letting him live when so many others had died. The gun crew were inside his luminous sight now, warmly dressed, crouching behind the quadruple 20mm, with a mountain hut behind them. The 4 automatic guns were already firing, doing mortal damage to his Mosquito, but he noticed the shells no more than a berserk fighter notices the blows of his opponent. A white-faced loader carrying ammunition clips halted, staring upwards in terrified fascination. Grenville's pressure on the gun button was as savage as if it had been on the windpipe of an enemy. He swung his rudder bar, mowing men down with meticulous care. Crouched behind his gun sight, he urged his plane on to destruction. It was a small thing that prevented the final tragedy. A shell bursting under the starboard wing that made the Mosquito lurch sideways. Grenville corrected the movement immediately, but its suddenness had thrown the unconscious Phillips towards him, and the observer's head nudged his arm. The contact pierced the mist of hate round Grenville's mind. It was as if the unconscious man were pleading for his life. One could sacrifice a conscious man. A nod from him, and the thing was done. But not this. With a curse he jerked back the stick. The shell-torn, smoking Mosquito pulled away not 10 feet above the stricken gun-post. Grenville's duty now was to get Phillips home. He knew it, and his bitterness was complete. Duty lay on him like the curse of Cain. With one engine feathered and his starboard aileron dragging loose, he struggled painfully to clear the snow-topped mountains. But the Focke-Wulfs were waiting. Crippled, with the last of his ammunition gone, he was helpless against them. A burst of 7mm sent a stab of agony through his legs, smashing them from the rudder bar. He managed to side-slip away, but he was tired. So tired. A Focke-Wulf came weaving in for the kill, its pilot's eyes cold behind his gun sight. He fired at point-blank range. One burst was enough. The Mosquito's weakened tailplane broke away, and its surviving engine choked and died. It struck the mountain top, skidded forward under its speed, then suddenly vanished in an enormous flurry of snow. A few seconds later, all that showed to the circling aircraft was a pathetic tangle of spars and the flaming mass of a broken-off engine. The Battle of the Svartfjord was over. The innkeeper slowly closed the folder. His eyes lifted upwards. "Well, there you are," he said quietly. "That's the whole story." The 2 young airmen were spellbound, too awed for the moment to speak. The innkeeper glanced round the lounge. There was no one else there now but the car driver, who was still sitting in the corner among the shadows. The English boy found his voice first. "What happened to Hilda?" he asked in a hushed tone. "Oh, she didn't stay here long after the raid. Like everyone else, she thought Grenville had been killed. She went into the services and stayed in uniform for the rest of the war." "Just what did happen to Grenville? How was it he escaped? I've never been sure of that." "The rocks tore off both wings, so keeping the burning engines away from the fuselage. The deep snow did the rest by cushioning the effects of the crash. Of course, he was badly wounded and in prison hospital for a long time. But surely, when he did get back home, he went to see Hilda." The innkeeper shook his head heavily. "She's never seen him since that last night before the raid." "But why the hell didn't someone tell her the truth? I mean, why didn't this guy Adams have the guts to tell her?" said the American. "He did tell her," the innkeeper said quietly. "But it was 2 days before he found out what Grenville had said to her. He knew Grenville had no girlfriend, he knew the whole thing was a pack of lies, and he told her so. He told her everything. It was a shock to her, but she took it as he'd always believed she would, but by then it was too late. You're forgetting Grenville's state of mind. It was he who had always believed there was an impassable barrier between himself and Hilda, and 2 years brooding in a prison camp did nothing to change his mind.
But if someone had told him she understood, someone did tell him, but he wouldn't believe it. He was too bitter. But once he'd given his story to intelligence, he was discharged, and then everyone lost touch with him. Letters came back undelivered. Nobody knew if he was alive or dead, and to my knowledge, nobody knows to this day. Well, what about Adams and his wife? How do they get on? They were divorced in 1948. Well, there's one thing I can't make out, Pop. You said that Cairns was a man in his 50s. I mean, I guess you're in your 50s, too. But you weren't 10 years ago. And there's something else, too. How did you find out all the details? All that happened in the intelligence room, the operations room, and in the house in the country? And how did you find out all the technical stuff? The innkeeper took off his thick glasses and wiped them. I realized some time ago that you hadn't been told my name, and was rather hoping that you wouldn't ask. It's quite simple, really. You see, I'm Adams. I bought the pub just after the war. The old man and I had become good friends, and he gave me first option when he sold. It was one of the things Valerie and I quarrelled about. She didn't like the idea of being a country publican's wife, and perhaps one can't blame her. Can be quiet here in the winter. Was it you who told Grenville? Yes, it was me. I wrote him in prison camp, telling him everything, and I had another go at him when he was ordered to give us the full story of the raid, but he wouldn't discuss her at all. I wrote him quite a few times afterwards, too, but all my letters were returned. Well, where is Hilda now? Daly asked. Back in Norway? Yes, she lives with a cousin in Bergen. Adams tapped the manuscript in front of him, smiling ruefully. It wasn't easy to get her permission to include her in this. Of course, I haven't used any of the true Christian names. Those are the only fictional names in the book, but she was still very hesitant. I think only one thing changed her mind. Huh? Well, what was that? Why, I pointed out that if the manuscript were published, Grenville might read it and realize how wrong he'd been. I'm pretty certain that was the only reason she gave in. Hey, you're right, Daly said. It could bring him back. When is it to be published? Adams' reply startled him. Oh, it's already published. It came out on the 6th of this month. And you've heard nothing from him yet? Adams shook his head. Well, maybe he wouldn't know where to find you, Daly suggested. Oh, no, he knows I'm here. I had already bought the pub when I last saw him in 1945. Daly was young. He refused to give up hope. Well, there's still plenty of time. Supposing he did come back, could you get hold of Hilda easily? Oh, yes. Yeah, we keep in touch. In fact, she comes over here every spring to stay with me. Here? Daly said hoarsely. Every spring? Why? Adams smiled quietly. Why? Why do people keep their memories alive? Why do they keep souvenirs and photographs? Tell me that, and I'll tell you why she comes over here every spring. The young American did not need telling. He was staring at the huge bowl of daffodils on the counter, with an awed, almost frightened look in his eyes. Adams nodded. Yes, this year as well. She's been over here for a week now. Of course, this a trifle wistfully, we've become good friends over the years. I like to think that has a little to do with her coming. He glanced at his watch. She went into town this afternoon. The bus is late. She should have been back over 10 minutes ago. None of them had noticed how emotion had been clawing at the face of the man in the corner. Nor did they notice how he started now at Adams's words. He only drew their attention 5 minutes later, when light, hurrying footsteps on the gravel outside brought him sharply to his feet. Adams caught the abrupt movement, heard his harsh, expectant breathing, and peered at him curiously. Slowly the white, intent face swam into focus. Adams gave one incredulous gasp, and then the lounge door opened. Half an hour later, they had all gone from the lounge, and Adams stood alone behind the bar. Something inside him was still trembling, still glorying, still weeping a little. In the glistening blur before his eyes, the lights from the photographs had diffused and become his ghosts again. They were as happy now as they had been in the old days, laughing, joking, congratulating one another. And then one by one, they waved to him and slipped out. They were the dead who wanted the living to live,
and for years their leader's loneliness had been their sorrow. They had joined him this night with a long-held wish, and at last they had seen that wish granted. They could all rest well now.